All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry to those of you who've got sort of my back to you, but my name is Ashish Shah. I'm the White House COVID-19 Response Coordinator. And welcome to the White House. Welcome to our summit on indoor air quality. Now, for many people, this may seem like a narrow topic, indoor air quality. But for people who've been paying attention for the last 2.5 years, and certainly for people in this room, you all know that this is neither narrow nor a side issue. It is absolutely critical if we're going to think about improving public health in America, improving public health in the world. Indoor air quality's got to be at the top of that agenda. Now, I'm a physician, and the way I have thought about this topic, there are many of you who are engineers and scientists and aerosol scientists and people who've been thinking about these topics for many, many years. As a physician, I think about the fact that for nearly the entire existence of humanity, pathogens have infected us in several key ways. Among them, most significant, the water we drink, the air we breathe, right? Those have been two major modes. And if you look at water, and you start with water, lack of clean drinking water has meant that people just got sick repeatedly, over and over again. People died in large numbers from gastrointestinal pathogens. It was just simply part of the human condition, just what we accepted. But over centuries, we learned that we can actually do something about this. With sanitation came massive improvements in water quality. Not a single event or a single step, though there are some single events, right, that have gotten a lot of attention throughout history, like the cholera outbreak in England, where John Snow mapped out the outbreak and got rid of the handle on the Broad Street pump and single-handedly changed the course of that cholera outbreak in London. But here's the key lesson as I have thought about the efforts to improve efforts to improve water quality. We learned that you could, of course, boil your water and make it safer. But the policy solution was not everybody should boil their water all the time. No, fundamentally, the reason it is safe to open up a tap in most places, not everywhere, and we're still working on that, but the reason it is safe is because we made a set of policy decisions as a country, as a world, that water needed to be safe and there needed to be systematic engineering efforts to make water safe for people to consume. It was an institutionalized change, did not require active behavior on part of people. You didn't have to think about as you opened up the water, is this safe or not? Now, obviously, there's still more work to do, and that's why the administration has made, for instance, replacing lead pipes a centerpiece of the bipartisan infrastructure law, where we're going to replace all the lead pipes in the country over the next decade. So my point is, even when you look at something like water, where we've made so much progress, you're constantly working on it, continuing to make efforts. But we've come a long way because of systemic fixes, possible in large part by advancements in science and advancements in policy. Now, in my mind, indoor air is that next frontier when it comes to thinking about public health for humanity. Now, obviously, outdoor air pollution is incredibly important and, of course, influences indoor air. But today, we're going to focus on indoor air quality. So one of the things I learned early on in my public health career was that most Americans, really obvious, but you don't think about it if you're not in this field, most Americans spend most of their time indoors, right? We all spend about 90% of our time indoors. Here we are, all of us today, indoors. Actually, on Twitter, somebody was saying, this indoor air quality summit, are you going to hold it outdoors? Like, no, it's an indoor air quality summit. We're going to figure out how to make it relatively safe indoors, which we have. Tall ceilings. Most of us have gotten tested today. We've got air filters and air purifiers. But the bottom line is that we know respiratory pathogens like flu and RSV, and yes, SARS-CoV-2, spreads mostly indoors. And this once-in-a-century pandemic has given us a moment, right? A moment where we can drive significant structural changes in the air that we all breathe. Now, that is certainly the belief of this administration, and that is my personal belief. And here's the key part in my mind. We can't emerge from this pandemic not having done this, not having tackled this topic. So let me lay out a simple case, and there are lots of cases for it, and I'm going to tell it to you as a clinician. So I'm a hospitalist physician, and before I took on this job, Every winter, December, January, I would spend a month on the hospital wards as a hospitalist. And here's what I experienced every winter, pre-pandemic. The hospitals would be stretched to their limit during the holidays. We'd have patients waiting in the emergency room for days because there were no beds on the wards, largely due to influenza and other respiratory viruses. That was pre-pandemic, right? And influenza is not going away, and we know COVID is not going away. And so as we look forward to this fall and winter, I think it is reasonable to assume that we are going to see a level of influenza that we saw pre-pandemic. Throw in COVID on top of that. Think about RSV and parainfluenza and all the other respiratory viruses. And it becomes harder and harder to imagine how our healthcare system is going to possibly manage the burden of respiratory diseases that are all around us. And so we could take two strategies. We could take strategy number one, where we go out and build thousands of more hospitals, train millions of doctors and nurses, and accept hundreds of thousands of more deaths every year. We could take that strategy. I would argue that's not the strategy we should be taking. We may need to do some work on thinking about our healthcare capacity. We have to bring the burden of respiratory pathogens down. And the single biggest structural change that we can make as a society is to do for indoor air what we've done for water quality. And that's why this administration has made improving indoor air quality a key priority. Whether it's in schools or businesses or other public places, and as I have said publicly many, many times, if you are somebody who runs a building, operates a building, it is incumbent on you to make sure that the place you run, the place you own, does not become a place that unnecessarily spreads viruses, gets people sick, fills up our hospitals, causes unnecessary suffering and death. We need healthy buildings because we need healthy communities. And that brings us to this summit. So the purpose of this summit isn't just to highlight these issues, though we want to do that. The purpose is to highlight the work we are doing in the administration and the work that so many of you are doing outside the administration. Right? We want to showcase schools that have made improving safety a major priority. We want to showcase businesses that have made investments in their employees and their customers. To remind people that the benefits of these improvements have to be felt and seen for it to be real. So beyond the showcasing, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the actions that the administration is taking. In March, we launched the Clean Air in Buildings Challenge as a call to action for building owners and operators across the US to make improvements to ventilation, filtration, and facilities to improve the quality of indoor air. Today, we're launching a new website, whitehouse.gov/clean indoor air, where businesses and schools can visit to learn more about Clean Air in Buildings Challenge. They can make their pledges and get a badge that you can show on your website or download and put up. We've made strides in helping schools improve ventilation and filtration. Right? The American Rescue Plan has allocated hundreds of billions of dollars. And today, nearly half of school districts have committed to using ARP funds to improve ventilation. Obviously, we want to keep driving that to higher and higher numbers, but that's been a really important thing. We're working with outside experts like Sheet Metal Workers Union, known as SMART. I think somebody from SMART is here, I think, hopefully. Will be. And NEMI and others to make guidance and technical support for skilled, trained, qualified technicians available to schools. I always remind people who run school districts, they're education experts. They're not building experts. They're not indoor air experts. They're not public health experts. They're education experts. That's why they run schools. They need help with these things. So money is one part of it, but technical capacity is another part. To drive additional progress, the Department of Energy is offering schools one-on-one consultations to improve indoor air quality. Now, one of the goals of this summit is to elevate and recognize efforts that folks are making to improve indoor air quality around the country. The EPA, our colleagues over there in that corner from the Environmental Protection Agency, released a new request for information to solicit input from experts, researchers, industry on measures to document the progress folks are making. It's live. All you have to do if you want to find the RFI is you can Google RFI Clean Air EPA. The website is just long, so I wasn't going to make you memorize that. Or you can find it on the Federal Register as well. Okay, a couple more things, then I'll wrap up. As part of this effort, later this month, you're going to hear from the Department of Energy and announced a set of criteria for recognizing schools that are making indoor air quality improvements as part of its Efficient and Healthy Schools campaign. The DOE and EPA are continue to collaborate on efforts that will allow everyone, small businesses, big businesses, to make improvements and be recognized for that improvement. And last but certainly not least, the government, as a major building operator, is doing a lot of work to improve indoor air quality, and you're going to hear from our GSA colleagues on that later. So, bottom line, we are pushing across a whole set of issues, working to drive improvements. Because while I've talked about indoor air quality as an important thing for public health, for school performance, for all sorts of respiratory pathogens, my day job is as a COVID response coordinator to think about how do we manage COVID. And what we know is still have hundreds of Americans dying every day of this virus. We've got to work on vaccines, we've got to work on treatments, we've got to make sure testing is available, we're doing all of that. But we've got to make improvements in indoor air quality as part of our response to COVID, as part of our response to respiratory pathogens all around. So this is a pretty fundamental part of our response. So super excited that you're all here. Many of you traveled far, some of you traveled not so far, but really thankful that all of you took time to come and join us. We know that there's a lot the administration can do, but at the end of the day, it's what all of you do outside of the administration, in the private sector, in schools, as building operators. So many of the different roles that you all play. And the last point I will leave you with is, as you go out and do this, know that the Biden-Harris administration is fully committed to this topic. You have a partner in us, and we want to work with you and help you drive real improvements in this area. All right, that is my set of remarks. I just want to say thank you all for joining us. The bottom line here is we got a lot of work to do, folks. We're making progress. We got a lot more work to do. And we really are committed to making sure that this is something where we as a country and as a world make progress. If that is something we can do, that is going to be an important legacy coming out of this pandemic. So let me turn it over now to my colleague and friend Joe Allen, who's an associate professor at the Harvard School of Public Health, director of the Healthy Buildings Initiative, somebody who's taught me a lot over the years about how to think about indoor air quality. Dr. Allen, thank you.
Good afternoon. All right. Dr. Jha mentioned we spend 90% of our time indoors. I'm going to ask you to think about it another way. Take your age and multiply it by 0.9. That's how many years you've lived indoors, your indoor age. I'm 47. I've spent 42 years of my life indoors, in homes, apartments, schools, airplanes, trains, buses. Think of it this way: it becomes obvious and intuitive that the indoor environment has an outsized impact on our health. So much so that, as I mentioned at an event Ashish hosted a few years ago at Harvard, the person who manages your building has a greater impact on your health than your doctor. Think about that. Let me ask you another question. If you went and asked people what constitutes healthy living, what are the responses you'd get? They say, I need to exercise 30 minutes a day, I need to eat healthy, smoking's bad, outdoor air pollution is bad for you. That's great. How many people would IAQ come to their mind when asked that question? Not many. How many people would recognize that the majority of your exposure to outdoor air pollution can actually occur indoors? Today is part of the effort to change that. It is an immense honor and privilege to be invited to the White House to talk about indoor air quality. I want to thank President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Dr. Jha and his team for elevating this topic into the national discussion. The original sin in the COVID response was the failure to recognize airborne transmission as the dominant mode of transmission. In addition to decades of science showing better ventilation associated with reduced spread of respiratory viruses, the early clues during COVID were obvious. Nearly all spread indoors in underventilated spaces, and super spreading events with 90% attack rates that could not possibly be explained by droplet transmission or everyone touching the same elevator button. The case for airborne transmission is airtight. This means that buildings should be the first line of defense. This wouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that we haven't designed and operated our buildings with health or respiratory infection control as the goal. Instead, we've had standards that target bare minimum ventilation rates, like the ASHRAE standard, ventilation for acceptable indoor air quality. Acceptable is not acceptable. These standards have led us to seal up our buildings, choke off the air supply, despite decades of science showing us that current ventilation rates are too low. So we have a novel respiratory virus that spreads nearly entirely indoors, smash up against our buildings that have low ventilation rates by design. Is it any wonder why this pandemic has been so devastating? And this devastation has been plagued by inequities in cases, hospitalizations and deaths by race, ethnicity, income, and work. It should come as no surprise to anyone that we see similar inequities when it comes to ventilation. Not only are the ventilation standards too low, but performance drops over time too. A school might be designed for 3 air changes per hour, but on average, schools get about half of that. And we see even lower ventilation rates in schools with majority Black or Hispanic populations, and lower ventilation rates in schools with majority of students on free or reduced lunch. Healthy buildings are at the nexus of COVID, health, equity, climate, and business. I'm going to make a series of recommendations. On COVID, to address COVID and other infectious diseases, it's imperative we think of buildings as central to our fight. I want to draw your attention to a report from the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, Task Force on Safe Work, Safe School, and Safe Travel. I'm joined by a few members today, Dr. Corsi, Dr. Marr, Dr. Miller, Dr. Michaels, Professor McCumber. We challenged ourselves this summer with a simple question. What set of actions, if every building took right now, would really move the needle quickly? We released a report called The First 4 Healthy Building Strategies that every building should pursue. Number 1, give your building a tune-up. We do this for our cars, we don't do it for our buildings. It improves indoor air quality and saves money. 2, maximize outdoor air ventilation. 3, upgrade filtration. We need to move away from filters designed to protect equipment to filters designed to protect people. MERV 13 is the new minimum. And we can supplement this with portable air cleaners. This is not the end-all list, but this is where you should start. There's a session later today on innovations that go beyond this. On ventilation metrics, we can't just say bring in more air. The obvious next question is how much? And here's where we have failed miserably for the past years and where we need to correct now. There is debate about the best metric. Air changes per hour, CFM per person, CFM per square foot. And then there's debate about the specific targets. But where there's no debate is that the current targets are too low. They are not health-based, they ignore 40 years of scientific data, and they need to be changed. And while there's debate about these metrics and targets, as there should be, as I look across experts, irrespective of their preferred metric, I see it all converging on similar targets. In my opinion, there's strong scientific support for targeting 4 to 6 air changes per hour in rooms with typical ceiling heights. I also think there's strong scientific support for 30 CFM per person as a new target. I recommend that we immediately focus ventilation improvements in 2 key areas, those most at risk from COVID, seniors, and those most at risk of disruption from COVID, kids. This can be done right now before winter. If we make IAQ improvements, how will we know it's all working? I think we need to take the pulse of our buildings regularly. When you go to a doctor, what's the first thing she does? Takes your pulse, takes your blood pressure, basic indicators of human physiology and function. We need to do the same for our buildings. We can take the pulse of our buildings using lower cost indoor air quality sensors that measure things like CO2, a proxy for ventilation rate. Indoor air quality monitoring should become the norm in every building, much like we measure temperature. Seeing an IAQ monitor on the wall should become as normal as seeing a thermostat. Businesses beware. Individuals and institutions have developed new understanding and acceptance and expectation of health protections and tracking and reporting in their life. Portable health sensing technology is getting cheaper and more ubiquitous. This includes wearable devices, but also these portable real-time air quality sensors. That means as you enter a store, office, gym, you can immediately answer that question. Is the ventilation good in here? These expectations of screening, sensing, and sharing will not be reversed. The age of IAQ information asymmetry is coming to a close. On equity, we need to create standards for better IAQ and codify this, or else our approach to buildings will go down the same path of how we approach a lot in health. It'll be for the privileged few who can afford it. Standard-setting organizations like ASHRAE, CDC, NIOSH, others must develop health-based ventilation targets and IAQ standards for our buildings rather than these bare minimums. A future of healthy buildings that is confined to a select few would be a gross failing. We have a panel later today focusing on indoor air quality and equity. On climate, we must ensure that these healthy building strategies like enhanced ventilation and enhanced filtration are not at odds with our climate goals. Buildings consume 40% of global energy. In some cities, it's 70%. In response to the global energy crisis in the 70s, many tightened up their building envelopes to conserve energy, ushering in the sick building era. Energy efficiency at the expense of indoor health is a false choice. We can and must have both. We need to deploy existing and readily available technologies in our buildings to ensure healthy IAQ while reducing energy demand. Energy recovery ventilation, air source and ground source heat pumps, drawing electricity from renewable sources, and demand control ventilation, using air quality sensors to deliver air when and where it's needed. Thinking beyond IAQ, there's so much more to healthy buildings. My Harvard team released a report called The 9 Foundations of a Healthy Building. It starts with ventilation and IAQ, but talks about thermal health, and we need to think about lighting and acoustics, water quality, managing moisture, dust, and safety and security. In addition to the health and equity benefits, I want to point out that investing in healthy buildings is also just good business. We have an entire panel today focused on this point. Improving IAQ is a way to attract top talent, improve their health, and enhance productivity. Why spend dollars recruiting talent and then putting them in a place with poor IAQ where they can't think, concentrate, do their work, and they get sick more often? It doesn't make sense. Healthy buildings are really about protecting your people, your business, and your assets. Businesses must rethink their environmental health and safety and real estate strategies, moving past performative check-the-box IAQ, and incorporate healthy buildings into their ESG plans. Put all this together, the COVID benefits, the health benefits, the equity benefits, the climate benefits, the business benefits. It becomes quite clear there's no reason not to improve indoor air quality in our buildings. Now that the world has experienced COVID, healthy buildings are no longer nice to have, they're the new minimum. It is not lost on me in the importance of this movement and today's event. Humanity has made great strides in public health over the past 100 years, as Ashish told us, by focusing on the basics of water quality, food safety, and sanitation. Where has indoor air been in all of this? And here's where I want to give enormous credit and thanks to President Biden and his administration, including Dr. Jha, for elevating indoor air quality at the White House. For the first time, clean air in buildings is front and center in the pandemic response plan, along with vaccines and boosters. Get boosted this fall. Healthy buildings represent one of the single greatest public health opportunities of our lifetime. The decisions we make today regarding our buildings will determine our collective health for generations. I'm overwhelmed with optimism by what this opportunity, this moment and movement represents for improving the health of all people in all buildings, everywhere, every day. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Tracy Enger from the EPA, who will bring up the panel, our first panel on the Spotlight on Schools.
Good afternoon. No, it's not that kind of afternoon. Okay. This is more of a pronouncement than a salutation. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you and welcome. So as Dr. Allen said, my name is Tracy Washington Enger, and I have had the privilege this last almost 30 years of working with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Indoor Environments Division, and the joy and the vocation of my life has been in promoting our Indoor Air Quality Tools for Schools guidance kit to help schools across the country put in place comprehensive indoor air quality management programs. So this school's spotlight is really exciting, especially for me, and to see the White House again putting this kind of effort behind not just indoor air quality, but behind indoor air quality in schools. And so welcome to my wheelhouse. And I am excited to be able to have joining in this conversation 2 leaders who are going to share with you their experiences of indoor air quality in schools, but not just promoting indoor air quality in schools, but what it really means for them to be creating the healthiest, safest environment within their school districts possible. So joining me today is here to my left here, Dr. Alex Marrero from Denver Public Schools, as well as Dr. Jesus Jara, who is from Clark County School District in Las Vegas, Nevada. We know there are lots of Clark counties, but this is the one that we're really focused on today. Only one. This one, yeah, exactly. This is the one today. So I think it's really appropriate that we begin our conversation about indoor air quality with a spotlight on schools. As Dr. Allen said, every time I hear Dr. Allen speak, it helps me frame the issue even better. And when he talked about the most vulnerable to disruption, if there's anything that we have discovered in this last 3 years of dealing with the pandemic. It is that the disruption that it caused in our schools is something that we cannot, as a society, tolerate, right? That our schools are such important places to the infrastructure of our communities, because we recognized over these last 2.5 years that schools are not just the place that we send people to receive academic instruction. Increasingly, and I'm sure that Dr. Jara and Dr. Marrero can testify to this, increasingly schools are becoming the place where students are receiving everything from their main food and nutrition to their primary health care, their mental care. So many things are happening there. So when we think about, you think about in the public health sector and how schools are a part of public health, really. When you think about in the public health sector, there's been this move towards the patient-centered medical home. And I think of schools really as the student-centered educational home. This place where we're putting students at the center of an array of services that we have to deliver if we're ever going to achieve the kind of academic outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. And that makes schools central to the infrastructure of our communities. And so with that in mind, I'm excited to invite our panelists to first, before we go into the specifics of what you've done with indirect quality, introduce your school districts to us and give us an idea of what your school districts are like, why it's so important for them to be functioning optimally as infrastructure for your communities, and really, why has it been important for you to take these indoor air quality steps, to prioritize indoor air quality? Why is it important to prioritize it, and what motivated you to do it based on your school districts? So go ahead and get us started, Dr. Marrero.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. Incredibly honored to be here. I am the proud superintendent of Denver Public Schools, the largest school district in the state of Colorado. I am Alex Marrero, by way of New York. Let's go Yankees tonight. And I had to do it, Tracy.
Cleveland.
Yeah, but it's okay. We'll play nice for the next 45 minutes up here. We serve 90,000 students at our peak, 93,000 students. And Tracy, you said it beautifully. The days of school being the place that you go in the morning and leave in the afternoon are passé. They are community hubs, at least that's what we call them in Denver, making sure that all our students, scholars, community members, parents, guardians, and even those who do not have any interest in the schools, taxpayers, have access to our school buildings. That's how we function over in Denver Public Schools. In addition to those who have access, those that we serve, we also are supported with colleagues over 14,000. So we are the largest employer in the state of Colorado, arguably. Some would say that it's the city and the airport. In terms of our demographics, similar to the statistics that we heard from Dr. Jha and Dr. Allen, we serve majority minority students in terms of historically underrepresented youth. 55% identify as Latinx, around 10% African American, and so forth. Over 200 schools. We're larger. This gentleman to the left of me is almost 4 times as large as we do. So we represent in tandem 500,000 students. So that's a tremendous amount of precious lives that we influence on a daily basis. So in terms of our infrastructure, we have very old buildings, as you can imagine, from the turn of the century, to some state-of-the-art facilities. At least they were state-of-the-art pre-pandemic. Some campuses that will put some community colleges to shame. So we have the gamut, from the very old to the incredibly pristine campuses. I consider schools our safe haven. So during the pandemic, we both had the opportunity to, I say opportunity, but the challenge to lead during the pandemic. I, in another district in New Rochelle, when we were faced with the first case in the nation. And I always prioritize as schools being the safest place to be. In order to really live by those, of course, the mitigation, the masking, the ventilation, everything that we did then 2 years ago was par for the course. But right now, our new minimum, as Dr. Allen said, if we're going to maintain MERV 13 throughout all of our sites, then that's the expectation. So I'm thrilled that we're here as a spotlight. We've done things very well in Denver Public Schools, but I have to say that I'm a bit concerned about what the future lies in terms of what decisions we have to make as superintendents when it comes to scraping the pot, the financial pot, if you will. And I'm sure we're going to get into that, Tracy. And excited to be here. Schools are the safest place. And I want to make sure that our students are in schools and our staff are healthy in schools. As I have a saying, that teaching leads to learning. That's not a myth. That's scientific fact as far as I'm concerned. And our students learn best when they're in school. Just like a student won't learn if they're not safe, secure, supported, neither will an educator if they don't feel safe, secure. So we have to do everything in our power to make sure that everybody who's within the confines of our schools and our facilities are safe, secure. And that definition has expanded since the pandemic, right? It goes well beyond making sure that they're protected. The days of dropping your youngster off at school and making sure that they learn something for the day, yes, that's still a priority. But now more than ever, we want to make sure that they're going to come home healthy as well. Dr. Jar?
Thank you, Alex, Dr. Marrero. Maybe it's me. Okay, here we go. Thank you. I'm also really excited to be here and part of this conversation. As you were talking, Dr. Allen, my team was texting. This is where we get a lot of our information. So you are a rock star in Clark County and Las Vegas as we collect all your data and research. So we are the 5th largest district in the country. In Clark County, over 366 schools, 300,000 children, over 9,000 square miles, close to 9,000 square miles. So when you think about what we serve, one of the things that I'm also cognizant of is that I am the 4th largest rural district in the state of Nevada. So I have schools that are from 27 children in an elementary school to 4,000 kids in a high school. 47% Latino, 14% African American, so we are a majority minority school system. I also have the opportunity we are the 2nd largest employer in the state of Nevada behind MGM, with 40,000 employees in our school system. 18,000 are educators. So 20%, I would say 68% of my schools are over 20 years of age. So we run the gamut as well, and we have a bond program about $3.4 billion budget right now for the next 10 years to build 13 new schools and 33 fully renovated campuses as we continue to expand, and obviously not the growth as much. What we are doing is really the change in the demographics, and really we're still overcrowded schools, so we're expanding in some of our opportunities. I've been there 4 years. I've served as superintendent, as also served as the HVAC technician in this last 2 years. I've also served as the nurse specialist. I've also served as the you call it, as superintendents, we had to transform to learn quite a bit about everything that was going on with the work around COVID. These past 2 years, one of the things that, as my colleague Alex mentioned, and we always have been the hubs, and we noticed it more, but the inequities that we have seen through this COVID pandemic, we've had the haves and the have-nots that it's just been exacerbated. We've had children in schools, with 25-year-old carpets, and it's a matter of funding. So, and I say that not a criticism of the school system, not a criticism of what's the investment, and I believe, and what I've seen in the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, is their investment. I was around back when Race to the Top, those of you with President Obama up in his administration. Let me give you a couple numbers. Back when we in education, there was a $4 billion investment in K-12 education. We thought that was a lot of money. There's a $122 billion investment in this ARP. What this administration, I would tell you, historically has been the largest investment, and I say investment in our children around K-12. And it's not enough. Not that I'm asking for more, but the reality is that I have, when you talk about facilities and when you talk about our health of our children, I have a $6 billion gap in facility infrastructure. As we're building and growing, just in my HVAC, I have a $2 billion hole that I have to really try to recap. So when we hear there's money to be spent, there's a great need that COVID pandemic has exacerbated. And I can tell you, as we continue to do the best we can with what we have and expand our efforts, I really applaud this administration for their investment, and I'm excited to be part of the discussion here. In 2019, we started, in our facilities department, our facilities unit, and really looking at holistic. It's not just our classroom space. It's not just what our children were learning and how the support of our schools. So we started, doing the coil cleaning and really getting air into our classrooms. Changing our filters we moved to more frequently, and then started where obviously as we're moving to the MERV 8 to now our standard is the 13. So it was good to hear that, because that's become our standard moving forward. In our COVID response, as we looked at our sick room and our well rooms, we put ionization units in there, obviously to protect the health of our children. We were one of the only districts, and I could tell you probably the only one that we handled, and I couldn't be more proud of the work. And I think this is where I would say the attention of the White House, because we created our own COVID Central. What does that mean? We created our own contact tracing. Our nurses became up and really to protect the health of our children, and provided one of our, put a old school, and our facilities came up, cleaned it up, and fixed it, and then we became where our nurses, our call center, and when we were making decisions around the health of our children, that 74% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch meals. I got close to 10,000 of my children are homeless, meaning they're couch surfing, they're living in apartments, they are in cars. So the need is great, and I am so lucky to be their superintendent. I am humbled and honored in the work that we're doing day to day to protect the lives of our students, but we have an amazing team that's doing some great work. So again, happy to share a little bit more into the details with the group, but we have a lot to learn. Thank you.
Awesome, and a great introduction to to what has really prioritized this work for you. And a couple of things, when you talk about the inequities that we know are there, COVID in so many ways just laid bare so many of the fissures in our society, and that those inequities being one of them. Last night I was talking to my son, about my 24-year-old, about what I was going to be doing today, and he was like, yeah, indoor air quality, got it. He says, but having gone to public schools all this time, are you going to talk about indoor air equality? And I was like, dude, I'm about to TM that, right? But that's exactly what we're talking about here, is closing those inequity gaps as well, and the challenge that we have there. And I love what you said there, Dr. Jara, about the many hats that you wear, because what we've discovered here too is that in schools, everyone's an educator, everyone is a facility manager, everyone is a healthcare provider, no matter what your role may be. Right now, everyone is filling all those roles. And so I'm really curious to hear more about the specifics of the interventions that you have taken, the science-based interventions that you've taken in your school districts. Part of the work that we do at EPA with our Indoor Air Quality Tools for Schools program has been to provide guidance to school districts across the country, but it really is only as good as how school districts are tailoring it to their specific needs. For their specific outcomes. And so if you can share with us what some of those specific interventions have looked like, and sort of what your approach was pre-pandemic, and what indoor air quality management looks like Now, as we have guidance around ventilation, filtration, supplemental airflow, what science-based interventions have you put in place to address this?
Sure.
Sure.
I'll start briefly. Thank you. Dr. Jara neglected to mention he also does transportation and drives buses as well, right, as we all do. In terms of science, well, let me first start by saying pre-COVID, I was as ignorant as many, right? I don't think I was alone there. We knew what we knew. We were trained to lead large urban districts. We know how students learn best, so we can answer those questions at any given moment. It was an incredible experience and us really leading by example and honoring the whole notion of being lifelong learners throughout the pandemic. So ignorant pre-pandemic, Dr. Marrero was. What we've done now is out of that $100 billion that we've referenced this afternoon, 25 million are going into specific air quality interventions at Denver Public Schools, specifically filtration, air quality monitoring, and upgrading existing systems. And that's, if I can, speak a little bit of what I alluded to and what Dr. Jara just mentioned in terms of the unknown that is the future. Dr. Allen mentioned in terms of policy. So I want to speak about funding and policy. So that's the answer, Tracy, right? So those three areas in 25 million, which is not insignificant amount of money, a tremendous amount of money. And we were able to have MERV 13s throughout the majority, hopefully all of our school and facility buildings throughout the district, and that becomes our minimum. Well, absent of policy, I am concerned when the ESSER ARP money goes away, which is an incredible shot in the arm, right? And that's the best way that I can describe it. It's seed money. What happens when it expires? And we have other things that we have to prioritize. And I'll give you some examples. There is a bus driver shortage throughout the nation. There is collective bargaining agreements that many school districts have to grapple with. We've been successful in leveraging ARP funds for that purpose and making sure that we outfit our schools. So again, we're safe, secure, not just our students and our adults. But we have that luxury at the moment because of the incredible relief funds that were provided. I don't know what's going to happen in 2-3 years when those contracts expire and we have another unit. Now, the best way that we can address that, of course, is more funding. Let's call it something else. It doesn't have to be ARP anymore. Let's call it air quality funds. Or we can put it into policy, because now with policy, I have no requirement to adhere to that, right? So that allow us to be more purposeful on how we address the other issues that we have to address, and when it comes to prioritizing. Once in policy, it's not a prioritization, it's a must, it's a requirement. So very thankful to seed funds. It would be impossible for me to tell every parent, every guardian, every provider, bring your child to school. They will be well taken care of. So I have that absolute certainty when I say that statement so boldly. And when it comes to the tripod, if I will, there is a lot of research and evidence as of the last 3 years in particular that academic performance is tied to building performance. And I've learned that throughout the last couple of years, which is tied to health performance. So that's the tripod: academic, building, and health performance. And if that's going to be the minimum expectation, I'm asking respectfully, allow us to say that this is a non-negotiable, whether it's through some continual funding or through policy. And as Dr. Ja, you mentioned when you opened up, we won't question water quality, right? If we open up a tap and we see something that looks less than translucent and is brown, we'll go into action or we'll close the school. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's like a gas leak. We don't know if that's the case when it comes to air quality. We'll walk into a room unbeknownst to what we're walking into. So if we have the monitoring systems, which we've invested in our school system and in our buildings, and we know when things are less than satisfactory or adequate, then we can close down and mitigate. If that's the expectation, let it be the expectation, because we will never allow a glass of water to be less than pristine. So that's the new minimum. That's how we're addressing it. But I'm fearful that if it's not through policy or additional funding, that we're going to be scraping the pot in the next couple of years.
And I'll be brief because I mentioned in some of my remarks when I talked a little bit about the district, one of the things that we started, with the cooling units, outside on our HVAC work that we started cleaning and just really trying to get more airflow into our buildings. That was some of the work that we started in 2019. Our facilities unit also, and just as it was not just kind of the air, but then one of the things we looked at, the old carpets, right? I mean, it's where kids are playing and making some of those changes as well, really to try to purify our buildings and making them healthy and clean as well. I talked about the MRFs system and some of that work that we created as a standard. One of the things that I would tell you that in my conversations with my chief of facilities at that time was really, in the gaming industry, right, where we live, they have really detected this is something that Dr. Marrero just kind of, the amount of level of CO2 and how they control that. Well, why, one of the things that I push is, well, how come we can't do that for our kids, right? And monitoring that and having some of that discussion. So it's, if we really, as a country and as a nation, are focused on improving, we know healthy buildings will produce healthy kids. We've done that. I'll use a different analogy and say, well, it's not just the water, right? I mean, we're looking at our food and what we feed our kids. So how are we monitoring systemically the air quality that our children and our teachers? Because I don't want to just say that it's not just our kids, it's our educators. They're healthy educators. So you start so we have to get something that we're starting to look at, in some of the research, but it's one of the things that we need to get better at. I will say this, we receive from the three different funding that came to us. First 32 million was just really COVID response, right? It was keep everybody safe. And we started investing. That's where we invest in the ionization in our health, in our wellness rooms, in our sick rooms. Not in every room. Did we need them in every room? Absolutely. But obviously when you have limited funds. So then the 82 million that came the second time was to open our schools. So now we have 777 million to address air quality, to address facilities, mental health of our employees and of our children, because people and I say this quite often, and the business sector closed. We transitioned to teach online that we weren't all trained to do, right? So the business is closed. Our educators just moved from face to face to a computer, and we still opened. And so there's a lot of different things. So my CFO reminds me, it's 10% of our budget that goes away. I have $200 million in need around technology, which is not something else we need to talk about. But here is when we really think about the air quality needs that we have. I really look at what we've done, but we haven't been able to do it enough in our 366 schools. We're moving forward with our new buildings, our fully renovated buildings, as we have created the standard with the MRF 13s, but we have a lot more work to do.
So this is a great launching point for a conversation around what you brought up there, Dr. Marrero, the tripod. We call it the three-legged stool of indoor environmental health in schools. There's so much of a focus on the school facility, but really it is that focus on the school facility is because of the impact that indoor air quality and environmental health has on health outcomes and academic performance. And if you don't believe me, go read Dr. Allen's work, right? We have the data. We've got the data to prove it. And so when you talk about, Dr. Jara, your conversations with your chief financial officer, one of the things that becomes important, I think, is how we do exactly what you've been saying, how we create parity between the way that our school buildings function with the product of the school building with the educational performance, and that connection being the health outcomes. And the more we improve health outcomes, the better we have, the better attendance is, the better our learning outcomes are, because that learning loss you don't recoup. So when you talk about funding and policy, talk to us a little bit too, we know that every school district is different, every school building is different. However, when you think about talking to your peers out there about putting in place lasting funding sources and lasting policy at the district level, when we talked earlier, Dr. Marrero, you talked about the connection that you now have and the understanding that's happening at the school board that helps create those kind of champions. Talk to us a little bit about the advice that you would give to other school districts about, at the district level, how you continue to create this priority for indoor air quality that connects it to health outcomes, academic outcomes, and at the end of the day, bottom line, financial outcomes.
At DPS, our investment, a $25 million investment, specifically is focused on the health, safety of students, because we believe that is intentional and it's directly tied to performance growth. However you want to define the bottom line of what we do is making sure our students have access and opportunity to succeed, right? Not to get all technical in terms of what that bottom line looks like, the opportunity needs to be provided. Dr. Jara mentioned in terms of what we all experienced during the pandemic, overwhelmingly, our students regress throughout the nation. There was a small pod that flourished, those self-reliant learners that have access and however you want to define privilege. But overwhelmingly, we had a tremendous regression when it comes to our outcomes. So back to what we all remember when we were students, being in school matters. Yes, we have a multifaceted approach on how we can educate students, and it can be multi-purposeful in terms of how you engage throughout the beginning and end of the school day, but it doesn't supplant or replace what works well. You mentioned the rugs, the colorful rugs. Remember the colorful rugs when you were learning how to read? There's no replacement for that. And I can speak to that as I have youngsters who are learning how to read right now. It doesn't work the same when you're doing it interactively with a stranger. So being in school is still the fix, if you will, right? So we have to make sure that we have access. I'm gonna plead again for funding and policy, right? But I also have to come up with a plan in case I don't have additional funding or policy. And here's how we're doing it at the local level. So we are making it we're trying to normalize this as a public health effort in Colorado and Denver in particular. How we're doing that, we have an environmental program manager who's been enrolled in the Indoor Air Fellowship Program, so we can have a resident expert at our district. So now that's sustainability. That's something that we can have for year after year. In addition to that, we all are familiar with dashboards. Some people love them, some people don't. They're controversial. So whether they're academic dashboard, an equity dashboard, we're looking to have an air quality dashboard, right? So maybe it's just a portion of an overall dashboard. So when you're deciding what school you're gonna go visit or even enroll, you'll have a snapshot of what we're able to gather, right? So we don't have that yet. We're planning for that in the near future. Hopefully we'll have something up before the end of the school year. And I want to also highlight our Board of Education. So without getting into how my board functions and everything that is the duly elected process of the school board, they are the voice of the community. And what they ask me to do, they're asking the system to do, DPS, Denver Public Schools. And they've prioritized from equity work, of course, teaching and learning, most recently sustainability, and they're gonna explore this as well. So perhaps we're gonna build on the sustainability end statement. An end statement is a fancy way of saying goals that I am held accountable for. So that's how we're doing it at the local level. So there will be accountability in terms of how we operate. And I'm very hopeful on how we're going to execute it this year, next year, and possibly in year 3, if we're counting this as our initial launch. But again, I wonder what's gonna happen in year 4 and beyond if we don't have the sustainability when it comes to funding or policy. I welcome both.
And if I can add, because I think it's critical to also discuss and look at how we monitor, right? I mean, I think the dashboard just brought me to something that we do as we're growing, not only within our facilities department and our facilities unit, also our environmental services, right? It's really thinking about our workforce, thinking about our health of our employees, right? And then also our students. We're measured, those of you who may not know in K-12 education, we're measured as part of our accountability on chronic absenteeism, right? So it's just, well, if kids are sick, we've gone through COVID, right? We told them to stay home, right? But now as we're bringing them back, it's what's that environment and that healthy environment. So my board of trustees is really very supportive of this work at the local level in policy. So we've also, as we continue to work to keep our schools open, because we know what happens when our kids are at home, the economy, but also the needs and the needs of our children to be in front of our adults, right? So the Board of Trustees has been really adamant and very supportive of the work around opening and having safe schools. No longer, not just the money, obviously we need to continue to do that, but I think one of the things that I look for is the technical assistance, the support. And I know, as I said, my team is really looking at your research at Harvard, but then also how do we then build, and we have gone through a transition as a school system to not just college ready. It's really how do we start creating some of those pipelines to create some of that own workforce, but then bringing that technical work into our schools, into the whole environment. It's a multi-pronged approach. We took an opportunity with during COVID to do some of this work while our kids were at home. So, very excited about where we're headed, not where we need to be, and we need a lot of help.
When you talk about where you're headed and where you've been, it definitely is reflective of what we see in the larger picture for school districts across the country, and the things that you've spoken to here in terms of policy and funding and technical support. It really reflects, what I've seen kind of surfacing. I'll call it the 3 A's, right? It is, in response to COVID, it has been increased access to resources, right? That has shown up. But it's also been an increase in school districts' ability to take action on gender equality because of the guidance that's gone out, because of the technical assistance, and needing more of that in a sustained way that makes the action possible, right?
Yeah, Tracy, if I can add, I think it's critically important to also discuss it, really get this out into the larger community in communication. That will help us tremendously is to the importance as we then move forward with this implementation, as we continue to expand our efforts, and why I'm spending resources and why our board is committed to looking at healthy buildings. So there's greater needs, obviously, as a school system, but the more outreach that can happen from the outer community into the K-12 of experts that can help us then move the ball forward for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And in our Tools for Schools framework, two of the key drivers there are around a couple of things that you were talking about, and I want us to, as we start to close, to be talking about these because I think that they really are critical. One of them is around evaluation, right? And you started to talk about what you're monitoring, what you're measuring, how you are determining that the interventions that you have are successful, and then how you are communicating that internally and externally, because that is the thing that builds the confidence and the trust that leads to more funding, that elevates the issue, that brings all of those things to the fore. And so I would love if you could kind of share the impact that your indoor air quality interventions and improvements have been having on your students and staff, and what it is you're looking for in terms of measuring your success, how you're communicating that, with folks so that it does stay sustainable. So, you talked about the dashboard and that being a forward-facing thing. How are you using the data? How are you using the metrics? How are you communicating that? And what do you need help with?
Well, I think this is something that when we're looking at our our strategic vision as a district and our plan is really, it's not as sexy to talk about our dashboards. It's, obviously when you look at student achievement, looking at some of the work that we need to do, that's obviously where the community is and is, the conversation around looking at our data points. I mean, I do that with my facilities folks and have that discussion internally. It's getting the public to understand, but then also to help and looking at what nationally is happening, and being that part of that conversation. So educate, I think it's more of the education of the public.
Thrilled that we're being shined on in terms of a spotlight, but by no means the Denver Public Schools have it all figured out. So I want to put that out there. I'm sure there's others who are struggling, just like we are, but we've done an incredible reaction and response, I should say, to everything that was COVID and our new norm now. When it comes to evaluation, the truth of the matter is there is nothing holding us accountable to doing this, and that's the scary part. So I want to just let that simmer for a second, because anyone can avoid this, right? There are competing priorities when it comes to test scores, when it comes to everything else that you can imagine are things that we are held responsible for. So if it doesn't happen at the federal level, then locally, it's a value statement for a Board of Education or Board of Trustees to say, okay, this is important to us. Thankfully, that's what my board has done, right? So now it does become an evaluation measure for Denver Public Schools, which I represent as superintendent. In terms of the dashboard and what we're looking for and what we've seen thus far is increased attendance, and I can't stress that enough. Being in school matters, right? This is not the lotto. You have to be in it to win it. You have to be in there. The more the merrier. And also when it comes to our survey results, something that we are prioritizing is self and welcoming environments, and that's just for our students and for our staff. And we've seen some response, and of course, it's coming from COVID. So if that was our baseline, then that's the absolute bottom of the barrel when it comes to how folks were feeling. But we have seen an incline on reception and being a part of the learning community. So when it comes to self and welcoming survey qualitative results and quantitative in terms of attendance, and not for students, our staff attendance as well. And there is a tremendous teacher shortage, right? So that one absence means a tremendous amount, because one absence when you have a couple of vacancies in the school building can easily become an operational closure of that entire school, which means everybody misses out on the day of learning.
So as we move towards the close of our panel here, I want to invite you to think about anything that you want to share, with folks that you haven't gotten a chance to share that might not have asked, and give you a moment to give your closing statements here. And you heard Dr. John this morning talking about the moment that we're in, and Dr. Allen talking about how it is becoming a movement. And it absolutely is. COVID has brought us this moment, and because of the actions of school districts like you see before you right now, it has become a movement towards indoor air quality. But we have this opportunity right now to take this moment that is becoming a movement and turn it into a monument for environmental health and improved indoor air quality, improved health for students and staff in our country forever and ever. Amen. And so that is what I would invite you to do, following the example of these fine gentlemen. And so, anything what you want to close with?
Yeah, again, thank the Biden and Harris administration for really putting something out into our conversation locally, but also nationally. We don't have it all figured out yet. We got a lot of work to do and a lot of learning. But I would tell you this, that as I mentioned, my board is committed, just like Dr. Marrero said, but I just can't thank the Biden and Harris administration enough, because this has been really critical for us as a school system. We got just honor to be here. Thank you.
I want to echo those sentiments of gratitude, honored to be here. You said monumental movement. I'm going to say let's seize the moment and the momentum that we have right now. So add that to the M's, right? So movement, momentum, monument. We're in election season. I know that I'm going to do this when I get back to Denver. I'll No, there'll be candidates here, whether it's mayor or senator race, I'll be right where you're sitting, and I'm gonna say, hey, how are you gonna prioritize education? What we're gonna do about youth access, to firearms and safety in and around schools, and then I'm gonna say, what are we doing about sustainability and air quality? I'm asking those questions, so I can have our, elected, no, my soon-to-be partners, to go on record saying this is a priority, right? So I say on the federal level, let's seize the moment, because the opportunity is right now.
Thank you, Dr. Marrero. I'll add your M to that, that great alliteration, right? So we are moving into, so first of all, please join me in thanking our speakers. We are moving into a break, and as we do, we're going to invite you to return to the room at 2:15. And we will have an afternoon there that will continue with 3 more panels, and I just want to put a little something in your minds as you go into these panels. We have a framework that we apply to indoor air quality in schools, right? That is organizing, communicating, taking action, planning continuously, and continuous evaluation. Those key drivers are not specific to the school setting. They apply to quality indoor air quality management in any domain, in any building type. So as you're listening this afternoon to the panels that are coming up, I want you to be listening for that kind of Rosetta Stone of a framework that we have given you for continuous improvement. You're listening for strategies for organizing, strategies for communicating, strategies for taking effective action, strategies for short and long-term planning, and for continuous evaluation of your success. They are going to surface in everything that you hear this afternoon. So be listening for those and getting ready to take action. We thank you for your attention during our session.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Goffman, and I'm the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Office of Air and Radiation. And I have one job, and I think I should be able to do it, and that is on behalf of Administrator Regan and on behalf of my colleagues in the Office of Air and Radiation at EPA, is to thank you all for participating in today's event. Because I think what we have in this room is that magical combination of leadership and work. I know that nobody would be here unless you already understood and had a commitment to the importance of ensuring public health by improving air quality inside the built environment. I also want to thank Dr. Jha, the President's COVID advisor, and OSTP Director Prabhakar for your work and your team's work in putting this event together. You all would not be here if you didn't already know what I'm about to say, so I'm only going to repeat what you already know by way of offering you recognition and thanks for your ongoing work and investment in addressing one of the most important high leverage public health initiatives or public health toolboxes that we have. And that is making sure that the air quality that our students and teachers are exposed to in schools, that our colleagues and fellow workers are exposed to in offices and businesses, and that everybody across the country is exposed to in their homes, can actually be a vehicle for protecting and improving the public's health. You all know that indoor air quality is critical to protecting the public's health. You know that it's critical to the performance of students and teachers in schools. And you also know that because it's a universal good, it has to be delivered to all of our fellow citizens in all of our communities, including those communities that are already overburdened by other public health and environmental stressors. We already know that we have the leadership here We already know that we have the understanding and expertise here. And thanks to Congress, we already know that we have critical resources to devote to this effort. But what you all bring, as I said at the beginning, is your expertise, your leadership, and your commitment to doing the hard work to protect indoor air quality. I think in that spirit, I should probably not take up too much more of your time because there's still a significant amount of information and learning that's to be shared on this program. I do just want to emphasize that the most important thing that you all can do going forward is to come out of today's program with an understanding that what is in this room now represents a broad nationwide network of public sector and private sector support in the form of expertise, resources, and ultimately solidarity, supporting the commitment to achieving indoor air quality. And in that spirit, I'm actually going to turn the program over to the next panel, who will address improving indoor air quality in the private sector context and explaining why it's actually good for business or an intrinsic part of a good business model for businesses to invest in protecting and improving indoor air quality. Thank you.
My name is David Michaels. I'm an epidemiologist and professor at the George Washington University School of Public Health. I ran the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, in the Labor Department for more than 7 years under President Obama. As many of us have seen up close, we've gone through a transition in our understanding of the way COVID is spread, and therefore the ways to best prevent people from getting COVID. The beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of focus on droplets, which led to the idea that 6 feet was somehow a safe distance to stay from people. And surgical masks were protective. And fomites, which of course led to the stressing the importance of hand washing. Of course, those are still important, but I'm proud to say that OSHA understood from the very beginning that this understanding of COVID spread was inadequate. And I'm very glad to see that Doug Parker, who's the Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA, my successor, is here in the audience. OSHA is very much focused on these issues. We learned during the H1N1 pandemic in 2009, 2010, that many viruses, like coronavirus, like influenza, were spread not just by droplets, but by aerosols, tiny airborne particles that can be expelled just by breathing. They can travel the air far more than 6 feet in distance, and they can accumulate in the air, leading to greater exposure, very much like industrial chemicals, for example. This means that respirators like N95s are far superior to surgical masks, and it's vitally important to ensure the indoor air we breathe is as virus-free as possible, even if we are more than 6 feet away from other people. And we know from basic industrial hygiene principles that to protect workers and others in indoor environments, the most effective approach is the hierarchy of controls, which says that before you change the worker, before you change the person by having them wear PPE, first change the environment. In this case, clean the air. It's taken far too long, but 2.5 years into the epidemic, it is now widely recognized that clean indoor air is the key to getting workers safely back to workplaces, students safely back to schools, patients safe in hospitals and long-term care facilities, and generally preventing more spread of COVID. Now, so we're very fortunate today that we have some businesses that recognize this as well, and they know that clean air makes good business sense. And on our panel today are leaders from 3 corporations and 1 enormous government agency who are going to share their experiences trying to make the air clean in their facilities, safe for their workers, for customers and for the public. So our panelists are Jordan Silberman with Monumental Sports, Michelle Schneider from Salesforce, Kevin Kampscher from the General Services Administration, and Guy Vardy from Silverstein Properties. So I'm going to ask my first question. Let's go back in time, not all the way to March 2020. I'm sure no one wants to go back to March 2020. But let's go back a little past that. When people were getting vaccinated, the whole country was eager to open up. Employers wanted workers to get back to work. I'd like each of you to tell us first what your organization does and what you tried to do to make the indoor air safe so you could reopen. And let's start with Jordan.
Hello, everybody. Excited to be here. Jordan Silberman from Monumental Sports and Entertainment. I am directly in charge of Capital One Arena right down the street, with the home of the Wizards and Capitals, where we host events 220 nights a year. And the goal for us is to get people into the building as safely as we can. Coming out of the pandemic, I think everything really changed, and the baseline for safety and security really transformed from just physical security to how do we make sure that people feel comfortable coming into the building, to make sure that when they're inside the facility, that we can deliver a safe environment for them to experience our events, Caps games, Wizards games. So through that came a lot of innovation and partnership. We had just stood up a public-private partnership with DHS and Smart City Works to establish a system for us to really measure and track our safety and our security in the facility from more of a physical standpoint. And moving into the pandemic, we really wanted to leverage that as an opportunity for us to see what we could do with this sensor suite that we installed in the facility, the in-building sensor suite, the IBIS platform, to really solve a problem for us to ensure that what we are doing in terms of maximizing airflow and air exchanges in the building, making sure that we had people coming in with mask compliance, that we had a way to field verify that in real time. So, I really appreciate the Biden administration for having us here, and I think it's important for our business to be represented as we host so many events, and we drive so many people into our facility to make sure that we're partnering with the government to ensure that we can offer a safe environment.
Great. Thank you. Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle Schneider. I am the Senior Vice President of Global Workplace Services at Salesforce. We are a technology company. We started over 20 years ago. We started off with CRM, Customer Relationship Management, and over the last 20 years, we have built into a customer data platform where we focus on marketing and platform and a lot of dashboards, as we talked about earlier. We've acquired Slack. Probably you're familiar with Slack. And so in my role, we have about 6 million square feet of space globally in 110 offices in 35 countries. We have quite a vast or a variety of offices within our portfolio. And with that, the timing that we're talking about here, it was really important for us, for everyone to feel safe coming back to the office. We had, in our design, always focused on the well-being and the kind of comfort and wellness of the employees coming into the space. We had focused on the design. It felt residential. We have many plants, all these things. But then when we transitioned into this new phase, indoor air quality obviously being a huge component, it is now a core value of what we look at in our real estate. We did have a touch of this on the West Coast when the fires were coming through pre-pandemic. We had started to touch on that, but definitely we immediately highlighted this as something that as soon as you open the door and you come into our spaces, you feel physically safe, you feel healthy, and you feel productive when you come in. So this is something. We have buildings under construction right now. It is, as I mentioned, a core value in what we're doing going forward. And of course, we continually evaluate our spaces all the time.
Thanks. Kevin?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank the administration for inviting us and setting up this panel. I've been working in the area of indoor air since the mid-'80s when I got involved in one of the very first sick building syndrome problems here in Washington, D.C., a building I won't mention by name, and it's shame. But it really changed my outlook from the purpose of what I was doing was to take care of the buildings, to realize that the only reason buildings exist is to take care of the people in them. So GSA has a large and diverse portfolio of 8,700 buildings that house 1.1 million employees. Happens to be 360 million square feet at the moment. It'll probably be less in the near future. The facilities include general purpose office space mostly, but also warehouse and courts, laboratories, law enforcement facilities, firing ranges, which, by the way, do not have good indoor air quality as a general rule. And I've never seen anybody on a firing range wearing a mask either. So it's hearing protection, yes. But so we're getting there. So what did we do? I mean, first of all, there's tremendous amount of feedback all of a sudden. Not sure where that's from. We followed the guidance. We fell into the same trap as everybody else, as not knowing exactly what was. Can I be heard if I just speak up?
No, but it's got to be broadcast out.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll try this one here. No. Okay. We'll just live with a little bit of feedback, I guess. So we fell into the same trap of everybody as worrying about the droplets. We even had to put out guidance telling people that bleach really didn't belong on upholstery. And reminding people that just because we wanted to get things clean doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow the cleaning guidelines and use good cleaning products. And remembering, too, that whatever you bring into the building is likely to migrate around the building. And so we try and really emphasize that. Don't bring stuff into the building that we're not going to like having around with us. Fortunately, guidance came out and scientific understanding of how the transmission occurred happened very quickly. We adjusted. We've changed lots and lots of filters in lots of buildings. The biggest difference, I would say, and I hope it is permanent, and it is at the moment permanent in our process, is a vastly increased amount of testing in the buildings. What is going on in there? What is the air quality? Knowing that information, reporting that to a central repository, monitoring that repository, knowing how you're doing it, making sure you've got the feedback out to the building operators to know what they are doing and how it's affecting the people in the building, establishing a mentality of vigilance about this that I think people don't really notice in many cases. And then feedback. And we get feedback from all kinds of sources. And one of the things we've done is a huge increase in the amount of surveys. And if people tell you they have survey fatigue, they're not listening to the people filling out the surveys, because we're finding that over the course of the pandemic, survey response rates have been going up consistently over time. People want to give you information back, and you need to use it as a building operator. I would like it if one day we could have every single commercial building in the country have a little scorecard in the beginning, just like the restaurants sometimes display in cities, you know. This is a quality building. This is a B quality building. And do I want to go into an F building? Not on your life. Thank you.
Guy.
Thank you. My name is Guy Vardy, Chief Innovation Officer of Silverstein Properties. We are mostly known as the developer of the World Trade Center, and Chief Innovation Officer is a funny position to handle COVID. The reason that I'm here is very simple. Innovation guy is dealing with everything that we don't have a best practice. And at Silverstein, at March 2020, we didn't have a best practice for global pandemic. So it's ended over my shoulders. We have a very good starting point because the majority of the portfolio is a Class A building. A lot of it was built after 9/11 with safety in mind. was designed by the mechanical system were designed by one of the leading mechanical engineering firm based in New York, so we had a good start. But we realized early on that safe building is not enough. It's also a trust issue. In addition to a dramatic health crisis and dramatic economic crisis, we also have a trust in the institute crisis. And one of the institute that people still trust is their employer. And we thought that it is our responsibility to communicate and to make sure that everyone is safe, but also feels safe. And doing that not by doing COVID theater with people wearing white in the lobby and thermometers, but providing a radical transparency to everything that we are doing. So it started by a series of town hall in which we met each and every tenant in our portfolio, and we're talking over 15 million square feet. We upgrade the mechanical system where we could. We tune up the mechanical system where we couldn't upgrade them. We brought a third-party auditor to check that the mechanical systems are actually performing the best the way that they can do. We install sensors across the portfolio. We create a central repository of the sensor data, and we integrate that finding into an app that each employee in our building can view and watch and see how the building is performing. In addition, we realized that it's very, very difficult task to communicate the quality of air ventilation. ACH, no one really cared about, CFM even further. And we are fortunate enough to stumble upon in a paper that was released by Shelley Miller and her colleagues that adapt the Wells-Riley model to COVID-19. And that's allow us to do something very, very simple, to translate the building data, the physical attribute of each room with the air ventilation, with the mask policy, and give a single number between 1 to 100, which is what's your infection risk in each room. And based on that, we create a software that was very easy to understand using color coding when you enter a room. It's enable the people in the room to understand whether they should wear a mask, what's the different effect of different masks. It's enable us as a facility team to upgrade using a portable HEPA filter certain areas that were not safe, regardless of the fact that we have MER 15 and over 5 ACH as the base building. If you are sitting in a conference room for 2 hours, it's not going to cut. So you need to add additional HEPA filter, and just this visualization, by translating it for a number between 1 to 100, enable us to see that. And we're quite proud about the work that we've done, because as a landlord, our responsibility is to, first and most, the bottom line of the Maslow hierarchy of need, safety. Very similar to the fact that we have sprinklers and fire exit. We also need to make sure that we have good air ventilation and people are not getting infected in our offices.
Thank you. I think all of you are really have gone down some very exciting roads, and it's really this discussion of radical transparency and the two sets of challenges. One is to figure out what's really going on in buildings, and then how to communicate that to people who use the buildings, to workers, to tenants, so they understand and they can actually take the actions that are required. So are there other challenges, either in terms of dealing with people or technology, that you all have dealt with that you think are worth sharing, and with the audience here and the folks watching at home and in their offices?
A lot of our challenges really stemmed from, our business is built on getting people in a group setting to feel comfortable coming back. And that started in the pandemic, with playing games and having events with nobody in the facility. And slowly bringing people back up to speed and feeling comfortable coming back. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity in what we've talked about and heard about today, things like the scorecards. There's a lot of stuff that's done on the physical side of the business, from metal detectors to walking in to offer a safe environment. There were some certifications that came out during the pandemic for cleanliness for facilities that all live entertainment facilities kind of went after, and is kind of a scorecard. And I think the next step is to really partner with the government and the administration to come up with the same level of consistency and regulations for getting back to live events, and offer people the opportunity to understand that coming into our facility is going to be just as safe as it is going to a school or going to the supermarket and across the board. I think we've positioned ourselves well at Capital One Arena and Monumental because of some of the steps that we've taken, whether that's partnering with industrial hygienists, mechanical engineers to really have a true understanding of how air flows throughout the building. A lot of that was dictated by league requirements, government requirements, CDC, Department of Health. But it's also good business for us because people need to feel safe coming back, and this is the next layer of it. I think that a big takeaway that I'm hearing here, and I want to make sure that people understand, is that industry needs government and government needs industry. For this to be successful, everybody has to buy in, and I think we have shown that the pathway is there for these partnerships with government entities to be positioned well to adapt to use platforms that are not necessarily built out to be something that's testing indoor air quality, to become that and be flexible. So giving the opportunities for those kind of partnerships to exist has really put us in a unique spot.
Great, thanks.
And for us at Salesforce, we did not have the expertise of indoor air quality within our building and engineering team. So we reached out to an indoor air quality a specialist team to help us evaluate all our properties. We only own 2 of the 110 locations. So one of our steps was to really build those close relationships with our landlords and understand the base building, what was going on with the base building, but then being transparent with the plans that we were having. So we were wanting to share all the information. As we worked through our portfolio, we would actually make the decision, open some offices, and some we would hold off on until we felt it was right for the employees to come in. We also have a leadership team at Salesforce, which is very focused on the environment and sustainability and the health and well-being of the employees and the guests that come in. And so we had to be accountable to them and let them know that we were taking immediate action to help make sure that the offices were safe to enter and to hold meetings and events and to get back to business as soon as possible. So we not only do we host our employees, we host hundreds of thousands of guests every year in our spaces. So we really wanted to make sure that everyone coming into our buildings felt safe and knew they would be taken well care of.
So I will pile on the people I've met from the schools today with age of buildings and the different configurations of buildings, probably our biggest significant challenge. And that's coupled with, well documented, and not just by Dr. Allen, but by a number of other people, the findings that if you think your building is operating the way it's designed to operate, it's not. The chances are very, very slim. So that opens up also an opportunity. I mean, you have to look very carefully at what you can do. We have about, I want to say, between 20 and 25% of our buildings are so old and the system's designed in such a way, we cannot physically put a MERV 13 filter in. So then what do you do if you can't do that? And how do you change things around? And one of the things that we dealt with, for example, is I work in a building over here. When we renovated it, we made the building work the way it was originally intended. Namely, in a city where 170 days out of the year, all you have to do to cool the building is open the windows. We made the building windows operable. And I read a little announcement once saying, we're going to seal up all the building windows to prevent COVID. And it's like, no, you don't have any basis for that. So education, we find that building managers definitely want to do the right thing, but they don't know what the right thing is. So getting the information out there. we worked on a tool. I'm going to be talking to my colleague to the left here about his tool as well, because I'm very interested in that. But we've got a lot of information that links you to CDC guidance, the reports from the Harvard School of Public Health, any number of other places, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Pacific Northwest National Lab, all kinds of people who are there. It's called SF Tool. And if you do SF Tool and just search for COVID, you get COVID-specific guidance. And you can also look for green cleaning products that will prevent people from getting sick and prevent your employees who are cleaning the building from getting sick from the materials they're using. So the education component, I think, is the biggest single long-term difficult thing. We can deal with the physical aspects of the building. You identify it, you fix it, and you move on. People change, people move jobs, and we really need to be extraordinarily vigilant about making sure that education doesn't drop away as we become used to the way we're dealing with COVID today, and used to the next one that's coming around, because that kind of complacency is what's going to lead to the next, mass exodus from buildings, and we don't need that.
So I'm going to echo some of the points that Kevin and Michelle mentioned. The biggest or the first challenge that we have is what's the right thing to do. And we learn in the hard way that MDs and PhD are not getting along. It's very, very difficult to get one answer from a PhD and one answer MD that's going to be actionable in the same answer. So for us as a real estate professional to just figure out what's the right thing to do when the CDC is saying, hey, it's not airborne, and OSHA saying, yes, it's airborne, and we are in the middle. So that was very, very difficult. And again, I couldn't thank enough for the works that academia was doing, helping us filtering through the noise. The second area, similar to or the opposite to what Michelle said, we didn't have any information about the build out of our tenants. We had all the information about the base building, but not what's the configuration of the floor. And the configuration of the floor is going to impact the safety. So we end up hiring an army of architects that getting PDFs and sketches and model every tenant build out in order to be able to model room by room. And that's brought us to the third point, in which sometimes the best practice is counterintuitive. So for instance, you look on an open floor plan, it looks like really dangerous, right? Tons of people in one space. On the other end, what we find out that private offices that hold longer meetings are actually much more dangerous than an open floor plan. And the one infection that we had in the office, we reopened the office in September 2020, we had one infection in the office. The one infection was 2 individuals meeting in the private office and ignoring the protocol saying that after 15 minutes, you need to wear a mask. And we know the details very well because I was the individual. And the third point brings me to the last element of compliance. Getting people to comply with your protocols is a hard thing. The way that we try to do it is to make it seamless. The beauty of the air filtration and air ventilation is that you, as an employee, don't need to do anything. It's a magic that happens behind the scene. You don't need to argue with people about masks. You don't need to argue with people about vaccination. It's a seamless way. We try to adapt that to other elements, such as testing to take samples from surfaces instead of mandate individual tests, etc. But the fact that a safety measure is seamless is a very good way to handle the compliance issue.
Right, and that is a testament to the hierarchy of controls. You want those changes to be ones that people can just accept passively, not that they have to do anything, and that there's certainly proof that that works. Jordan mentioned public-private partnerships. We're here in the White House. There are people from dozen agencies sitting in this room. How can the federal government help you? What do you see in terms of concretely public-private partnerships, things that people in the government can work with you and with other employers, with businesses, to really move this forward?
We're lucky to be in Washington, D.C. and have all the government entities in our backyard and, have the opportunity to be become a test bed facility, and work with DHS and Smart City Works and all the other partners. But I think a lot can be taken from what we've done, and how we've kind of created that model, and it can be rolled out across various industries and across the board. I don't think it's central to just what we do, but I think that it requires open and willing businesses and government entities that want to make a difference and have an opportunity, and it requires funding. So, I think that the Biden administration has made it a point to continue to invest in our test bed opportunity. And I think a lot of good comes from that. It's not just about, safety and security and indoor air quality. It's now turning into, energy conservation for us. And I think that's going to be the next frontier. I think a lot of what we've done on the that will drive public funding is geared toward that, but there's also a lot that we've learned from how our building operates from a mechanical perspective that we're going to be able to show true energy savings and tied in with what we're doing for air quality. So I think what we've really learned is that as long as you open your doors and you allow smart people to come into your building and tell you how you can run more efficiently, we still have atmospherics that are required by the NHL for temperature and humidity. But still being able to get as much fresh air but run our mechanical equipment as efficiently as possible. But it requires an ecosystem that's going to allow that kind of work to happen, and I think it can be replicated across the board.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Our biggest need was the best practices. It's less about funding, it's less about regulation. Just if someone that is going to help us understand doing the right thing. New York was the center of the apocalypse in a sense in March, and we derive our efforts to two areas. One is to continue operating as a business, and the other one to prepare reopening the business in which we did not have the skill. We didn't have anyone that had any experience in that, and the government had the expertise, but did less than a stellar job on communicating. In the next crisis, it will be great if the government can provide these best practices. It was very challenging for us to find out what's the right thing to do.
So I would just pile on a little bit. I think that issue of best practices was certainly one that we grappled with. We work with private entities all the time. 96% of the work that GSA does is done by a private entity working for the government. We collaborate on research. We collaborate on any number of other things. We have a couple of requests for information out to industry. We've learned a lot from just asking. I think the main thing I would tell my government colleagues is don't be afraid to ask, because you might even find out that you learned something, which we do frequently. We have a green proving ground where we're testing new technologies in our buildings. That's one of the advantages we can do, and we publish the findings. So I encourage anybody to mosey around gsa.gov/green proving ground, and all of these citations that I'm sort of flipping off cavalierly in my remarks are in the materials that are going to be released from this conference this afternoon. But I think that the one thing overall is that nobody should think that they need to know everything, because it's going to be a partnership regardless of what business you're in, whether you're in the government, whether you're in the schools, whether you're in Salesforce. It's going to be a partnership with other people, and that's the only way we get things done in this country. So thank you.
I was going to say a partnership is what we're looking for. We do want to think of ourselves as constantly learning about what's going on, using those best practices. But on the other side, we do want to create a playbook so we know if and when something like this happens again, or if it is the fires or whatever it is, we as a team are ready to respond, and we actually know where to go or how to get help.
Great. Well, so that's your advice for the government and public-private partnerships. But speaking to all the businesses out there, maybe each of you could say why you think it really clean indoor air does make good business sense, and is there any advice you would give to the business, to the organization, the employer that wants to start down this road?
I'll go lead off again. I think that in terms of my business and many of the businesses out there, it's all about consumer confidence and making sure that people feel comfortable coming back. I spoke about it a little bit before, but the baseline has changed, and you know, the new added element is indoor air quality, and it's our duty to find a way to demonstrate how we're meeting that bar. And I think that what we've learned today is that the administration is really taking a lot of steps to help establish what that will mean for businesses. And it's easier for me as an employee of a 650 person company with ties to the NBA and NHL to work with mechanical engineers to develop, the metrics and the whatever kind of bar we need to meet to get the number of air changes in the building and tune up our indoor air quality and our mechanical systems. But that may not be as easy for a small business. But I think that what I'm hearing and what we're getting at is that is changing, and there's more technology that's coming out, and there's more infrastructure support through the government that will help make that more accessible across the board, and allow for people to feel good about coming back.
I would add on to that by saying technology is definitely an area we're focusing on. I know we talked a little bit about sustainability, but one of the things we're doing is measuring our electric use across the board, and not just putting the weight on the HVAC system, but how can we be conservative in other areas. So we want to be a leader in that space. We actually would love to connect with small businesses and be seen as someone in this space that they can look to and partner with along with the government, so they get two perspectives on how to make their buildings as healthy and safe as possible. I think demystifying indoor air quality is a great way to help people understand it. And I think if it becomes part of your everyday life, as you think about all the places you go, it will be something that you will learn more about, and you're easily to understand how to feel safe in buildings. So again, thank you to the Biden-Harris administration for having us here. Thank you.
I come back to the purpose of buildings is the people in the buildings. There is lots of evidence, Dr. Allen among them, that show that increased ventilation and indoor air quality makes people think better, or that is to say, doesn't inhibit their thinking. That's probably a better way to put it. I can't tell you the number of buildings I've been in where the building manager lets the building coast from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody makes any decisions after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Nobody has meetings at 5 o'clock at the spur of the moment. So it's all about making good decisions and thinking, and all of the reasons why you bring people together is there. It makes good business sense. I would put it sort of, when I talk to my colleagues, it makes good business sense not to kill your employees and not to kill your customers. So, I mean, that's the harsh way of putting it, but it's really good business to try and develop that kind of reputation that we've all talked about, that builds trust, that says, if I go into a GSA building, I know I'm going to be safe. If I go into a Silverstein property, I know I'm going to be safe. If I go in and meet with Salesforce, I know I'm going to be safe, and it's going to be physically safe, mentally safe, and sound. So that's the main thing. The other thing that's surprising is if you do these things that we're talking about, 9 times out of 10, we find that once you tune up the building, you save more money on building operations than you're costing doing this work anyway. So you're going to save money, bottom line kind of money, and still have a safer building for people to work in. So it's just about vigilance and monitoring and using the technology breakthroughs of the last decade that have made sensing technology so inexpensive that we need to do it more and more ubiquitously.
As a landlord, we are not in the real estate business. We are in the productivity and engagement of employee business. We are as successful as our company, as our customer, and our customer are going to be successful if their employees are going to be productive and engaged. And air ventilation has an impact on three areas. Health is important and safety. The second one is sick days. One of the first tenants that moved to the World Trade Center 15 years ago moved from a really old building that was later demolished. And they report 30% reduction in sick days. It was a block away, so it's not the mystical karma of the neighborhood. It's the new air ventilation system. And the third one, coming back to school, a couple of years ago, we partnered with a British professor called Stephen Heppel that put a few thousand sensors to measure air quality in different schools around the globe. And he found out that in Dubai, in which it is desert weather and the air being recycled again and again in order to conserve energy, there was a high level of CO2. So we did an A/B test on second grades. On one classroom, they didn't change the air. On the other classroom, they improved the air quality, and they find out that the student average that being tested every week was 10 points higher when the CO2 level was lower. So if it's good for the kid, it should also be good for his mother and father at the workforce.
Thank you. So if I can just summarize here this last point, the co-benefits of clean indoor air are enormous. I mean, COVID has brought us together, and it threw a challenge to this country that obviously we have to deal with to get us back to, I don't know if we'll ever say normal, but back to an important functioning. But we know that by improving indoor air quality, we'll do more than just reduce SARS-CoV-2 transmission, influenza transmission, but we know there's reduced absenteeism, there's better performance in schools, people are more awake at work, and they will live longer as a result. It's well worth it. I think there are also economic gains to be had beyond those, but those alone are enough to drive this conversation. So I think this is a great moment, a great opportunity. I want to thank the Biden-Harris administration for elevating this. I want to thank Dr. Jha. We heard earlier about the new website, which is whitehouse.gov/clean indoor air. And there's an opportunity to actually sign up and for businesses to pledge that they're going to move toward cleaner air and to get a lot of assistance from that. So I recommend going on that website. And I'd like everyone to join me in thanking this panel, not for what they did today, but for what they've done in their jobs and the difference that they've made. So thank you all so much.
Good afternoon. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I am really glad to be here today moderating this discussion on the importance of indoor air quality and in particular how it benefits everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Taryn Williams. I have the privilege of serving as the Assistant Secretary for Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. And in that role, I am happy to serve as the head of the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP for short. Congress established ODEP a little more than 20 years ago to bring a particular focus within the Department of Labor across policies, programs, and systems that impact the employment of people with disabilities. And I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience how wide-ranging our mission is, because certainly transportation, education, and the physical and digital infrastructure of our country has an impact on the employment of people with disabilities. Today's summit on indoor air quality supports our mission, which is to develop and influence policies and practices that increase both the number and the quality of employment opportunities for people with disabilities. We know that it's critical that we improve indoor air quality to not only mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and other respiratory pathogens, but also to ensure overall that our workplaces are safe and accessible to people with disabilities, including the millions of Americans who may be immunocompromised or at high risk for severe infection. These Americans are entitled to reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act so they can fully participate in everyday activities in their community, including employment. Ultimately, improving indoor air quality in schools, homes, and workplaces is an issue of equity. And as you've heard throughout this afternoon, the pandemic has laid bare in many areas, particularly those that are underserved and under-resourced, how disproportionately they are affected by poor indoor air quality. With that framing, I am glad to be joined by this panel of experts with us today. Our discussion is going to focus on why clean air is important for vulnerable populations and what we can do to improve air quality now and into the future. I'll introduce them all by name now, but then ask that they say a little bit about themselves as we go through the questions. I'm joined by Kenneth Mendez, Chief Executive Officer and President of the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, Dr. Lindsay Marr, the Charles P. Lunsford Professor in Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Tech, John Auerbach, CDC's Director of Intergovernmental and Strategic Affairs, and also Carl Howell, Chief Program Officer with Community Teamwork. So we're going to get started, and I'd actually like to start with you, Kenneth. We know that breathing clean air has the potential to better prevent infections while also improving other health outcomes. What would this mean for the most vulnerable Americans? And in particular, how can this help improve those who are immunocompromised or have disabilities that increase their risk of severe infection?
Great, thank you for that, Taryn. I think I'll focus on the asthma community. My organization is the oldest and largest nonprofit patient organization representing the 65 million Americans with asthma and allergies. 25 million have asthma, and 5 adults and total Americans, and 5 million are children. So I really want to focus on the schools aspect and highlight that. I know it's a little bit repetitive, but I do think it's really important for our community. And when you talk about the benefits of clean air, over 4,000 people die a year from asthma. A lot of people don't know that. The numbers I just gave you, 1 in 13 people have asthma. So look around the room here, someone you know here has asthma, a relative, a child, and it's the #1 reason for missed school days. So we talked about some economics here, economic benefits of clean buildings, but a study was done over a 5-year period. It cost about $82 billion to the total economy from missed school days, medication, emergency room visits. So it makes sense to go upstream into schools. My organization is very much involved in community-based programs, and I think that that's where we can really help start working in buildings, working upstream to prevent some of the triggers of bad indoor air for the asthma and allergy community, and in particular in schools.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to now turn to you, Lindsay, and you've devoted your career to improving indoor air quality and have truly been at the cutting edge of research, not only during the pandemic, but of course before it. As we are thinking about designing indoor spaces with high indoor air quality, what considerations should be made to ensure these changes benefit all Americans?
Thanks for the question. My group has studied viruses in indoor air, specifically influenza transmission and others for over the past decade. We need to make it easier for people to experience good indoor air quality by setting standards or guidelines or targets for ventilation and indoor air quality. This is especially important for schools. As Dr. Marrero mentioned earlier, it would elevate indoor air quality to a must. I'll make an analogy. If there's a dangerous stretch of road, we don't just ask people to slow down and hope for the best. We set a lower speed limit. We provide them with a numerical guideline that is enforceable. And regarding these numbers, these targets, experts are ready to work with the government and other organizations to set these targets for public buildings. And this will help ensure that all Americans benefit from good indoor air quality.
Great, thank you. And John, I'd also like to have you expand on that. Improved indoor air quality can be about more than just pandemic preparedness. What other benefits can this intervention have in the long term? And if you will, please talk a little bit about the work that CDC has done in this area.
Thanks very much, Taryn. CDC, I think, has approaches the issue of indoor air quality not simply through the lens of responding to COVID, but really to think about it writ large. Because what we know is indoor air quality has been a problem for many different reasons. Kenneth has just talked about asthma. We know it's a problem for respiratory illness, but we know it's problematic for other reasons as well. From a public health perspective, we've worked on this when we focused on reducing smoking, reducing tobacco use in indoor places as well for a variety of reasons. We work on it when we look at risks associated with radon, for example. And so I think considering the multiple factors that are involved is important, because if we only focus on COVID, I think once the risk reduces for COVID, we don't want to lose attention to the situation. The second thing I would say is that we don't want to think about indoor air quality as something that can be fixed easily with just, say, one policy. So there are certainly policies that can be made, that should be made with regard to building rules and regulations. But we're also going to find that there's enormous unevenness in the country with regard to who that might influence, and that lower income communities are much more likely to not have the full impact of improved regulations. We know that that's true in housing. If you have older housing stock, it's more difficult to think about, well, let's just fix this with better filtration, because the investment wasn't there to begin with in the infrastructure of the building. Same thing is true with schools across the country. The lower income communities are more likely to have older schools and schools with less sophisticated HVAC systems. So we really want to think about this from a socioeconomic perspective, and we want to think about it from the perspective of the role of multiple sectors. So public health certainly has a role in the state, local, tribal, territorial level, as well as CDC, but we also have a role as a convener, bringing to the table transportation experts, city planners, a variety of different sectors where there is an influence on air quality. I'm a former local and state health official, and we didn't want to tell people in certain neighborhoods to just open their windows and get fresh air if if their apartment building was right next to a highway. That wouldn't have been good advice. We had to also think about what was the community in which they lived or worked, and what could be done in that larger community to affect those policies so that the larger socio and economic factors were supportive of optimal health, not simply focusing on what happened in a particular setting at one particular time. So, broad focus.
Great, and I'd love to bring you into the conversation, Carl. Your perspective working at Community Teamwork, you're working with and leading in communities that are directly impacted by poor indoor air quality. What should we be considering to ensure that our efforts are sustainable over time?
Thank you, Taryn. I think we've kind of layered on equity in these conversations and in the prior panels. When I think of this kind of question and this challenge that we have, wealth and privilege shouldn't be, the reason that you have access to proper health, quality air. The town, the neighborhood, the community that you live in shouldn't dictate whether you have access to healthy spaces to live, work, eat, sleep, and educate in. It's layered across housing, it's related across the schools, which we heard earlier. but I just want to really focus on kind of childcare programming as well as our housing, which John just kind of mentioned. Our housing conditions are old; they're outdated. As somebody said in the previous panel, you can't even fit the appropriate filters into some of these old, outdated systems to provide the appropriate care. So I think back history. We're coming with a reckoning of our discriminatory housing practices, where Black and brown communities were forced to live in communities that were not invested in. The housing stock is old. The quality is poor. Often those communities were forced to live next to industrial areas that have poor, have higher levels of toxins and air pollution. And we haven't invested in those communities. And when we do, we tend to displace that community for higher end or more privileged communities. We need to really reinvest in those communities to allow those communities to have healthy spaces to live in moving forward. I also, when you look at life expectancy, if you look at just at DC, the Black male in DC alone, in the District of Columbia, is the life expectancy is 67 years old, where their white peer is 77 years old. That, just let that sink in. That's a 10-year difference in life expectancy just because of the community you live in, and the lack of investment that's been put into those communities. Air quality is a huge piece of that, whether it's the air ventilation for your cooking, whether it's the air ventilation in just the system that your owner or landlord enables, choosing efficiency or lower costs over health. Also looking at, the housing crisis, there's almost about 5 million, there's a deficit of 5 million households in this nation. This is a huge opportunity to really change policy, change regulation, so that when these homes are built to meet the huge need for housing, that it is a healthy space, it's a safe space for all income levels, not just those that have the wealth to afford those spaces. Transitioning to schools and childcare, I'm not going to get into schools because we had a long panel on that, but at Community Teamwork, we're one of the largest regional childcare providers, and they're impacted just as much. So you think from birth to 5, before you enter the school system, your children are where? They're in childcare. They're in these centers. A lot of these centers, are either operated by nonprofits. A lot of them are family providers. That's their job, their income. So they're doing childcare in a home, which that home, as we just kind of talked about, doesn't meet the standards of health for those children to thrive. And then, as we talked previously, the better air quality you have, the better, the improved education quality, the less developmental disabilities and challenges that come with that. But we really need to invest so that everyone in this country has access to the same healthy spaces, whether you're in a home, in a childcare facility, in a school, or especially the place you live. And that's transitioning to this last 3 years has proven anything, that Black and brown communities were disparately impacted by COVID because they lived, worked in places that had poor air quality, and it impacted their communities at a higher rate than any other race.
Thank you for that. And I'll just note that throughout everyone on the panel speaking and this afternoon, again and again, I'm hearing that we don't want to lose the moment, that we have a sustained point in time where we have the opportunity to leverage the lessons learned of the last couple of years, to leverage the attention of public and private sector leaders on this issue of clean indoor air. So my question for each of you, and you started to address it, is how do we take advantage of this moment? How do we take advantage and sustain that fierce urgency of action now? And as we do that, how do we ensure that we prioritize equity in our efforts, so those that are most impacted are centered in our responses? And I'll start with you, Kenneth.
Okay, well, big question here. I do two things. One is investment. We've heard a lot about that, and I think the administration has done a tremendous job so far with the recovery plan money, but I think we need to continue to invest in the EPA, in your office, in the Children's Environmental Protection Agency office there. So I think those are things that we could do. But I also think we're a bit preaching to the choir here, so there are some business folks here, but just from an asthma point of view and disability point of view, when people return back to work, you really need to be aware that some of the cleaning products that you use might be irritants for folks who are returning back to work. You have to be careful about some of the air purifiers that you're using or cleaners, because some of them can throw off ozone. And when the aid money came out initially, there were a lot of companies out there who were hawking products that didn't have any standards. So we've been talking about guidelines and standards, and I think that that's something that we'd love to continue to work with this group in the administration in order to protect people with asthma and allergies and to make sure that we have clean indoor air.
That same question for you, Dr. Marr.
I think one of the things we need to do is to emphasize the benefits that come from this. There have been analyses showing that improved ventilation and filtration have a benefit to cost ratio of 10 or more. This includes for schools, for example, that may have high absenteeism rates due to illnesses caused by not only respiratory pathogens, but also other air pollutants that could exacerbate asthma and other conditions. But if you have more people in school, then those schools receive more funding, which is tied to absenteeism. So again, I think that emphasizing that there are large financial benefits to be had here across everyone.
John?
I guess I would say three things. The first thing I would say is we need support for better, faster, more comprehensive data that allow us to understand risk more than we have been able to so far. Dr. Walensky now is really making this a priority at CDC. But that means supporting agencies' ability to do that, and it also means working that we have complete access to data. Right now we still have uneven data that comes from states, so some of that really needs changing some of the rules with regard to reporting. But data and the latest science really have to be a priority. The second thing I would say is we need to recognize that to be prepared, we need a strong public health system. And we've suffered over the last decades of seeing our public health system deprived of its resources. Here, I'm not just talking about CDC, but local, state, tribal, and territorial. And we have to invest in the infrastructure and the workforce in order for us to have the capacity in every community. We can't just have the well-resourced communities that are able to respond. We've got to give a guarantee across the country. And that means really thinking about what it takes in terms of that system. The third thing I would say is we need to involve in an authentic and meaningful way people at the community level. I think we can't simply have national regulations or policies and assume that they're going to be implemented or understood. It's really, we have to really listen to the communities that are most effective and bring them to the table and engage them in setting priorities, implementing the kinds of work that's necessary, and helping to assess whether or not it's making the difference that we want to.
Thank you, John. That same question for you, Carl.
Yes, I'd be just touching on, regulation, ordinance, policy are the key things. I think Dr. Morano said it, policy forces us to do things. So I agree with all the panelists saying that. The other piece of that is enforcement and monitoring. We have to enforce. We have policies that we don't currently enforce, which is why some of these issues are currently happening, but really stepping up and amending our policies and our ordinances and our state sanitary code would be huge, as well as enforcement. The next piece is, again, just investment, incentivizing programs, equitable rollout and funding across all sectors and spaces, as well as capital support. Coming from the nonprofit world and lens, we receive funding from all different levels in government, and it's always to operate the programming. However, we don't receive a lot of funds or any funds, it's very rare, that is for capital to make these improvements to our buildings so that they are, our HVAC systems are at the highest level so that they provide a healthy, safe space, whether that's housing or schools or childcare. Capital expenses are really costly, as I think one of the panelists said he had like a $2 billion gap to do that. I know that in our organization prior to the pandemic, we had to invest over $2 million just in upgrading one of our child care centers that serves over 300 children. We took that, we focused on the health of our centers to provide that care. That investment allowed us to really up our game during the pandemic, where we were able to install the MERV 13s. We were able to add UV lighting to our ducts. We were able to increase the turnover. Otherwise, if we didn't make that investment and we didn't have the funds to do so, we would have been in really hard times supporting those children during the pandemic when parents are trying to go back to the workforce so they can keep their housing and keep a roof over their head. And the last piece I would say is also a targeted approach, identifying where are those spaces where the AIQ is the lowest and really targeting those spaces. And I had a conversation actually with Dr. Allen a little bit earlier around, if someone's operating at a 10 and someone's operating a 1, where do you put where do you invest? You invest in the people that brings the impact is going to be larger in the lower functioning spaces. So I think targeted approaches will be helpful. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. And all of you refer to, in effect, perhaps not best practices, but places in the last several years where you've seen practices emerge that we could leverage in the coming years. I'm wondering if you could each reflect on, are there investments in particular, or are there places or partnerships that you would point to as opportunities for us to replicate in the future, or as places for our audience, both here in the building, but also online, to look to as they're desiring to act in this area?
Well, I would start at the community level. Again, as we talked about before, one of the things that you can do, there are community health workers who work in communities that are fence line communities and have challenges with asthma. And those community health workers have shown, and that integrated asthma management program reduces emergency rooms by 50%, reduces hospitalizations, and also improves outcomes. So if you can work in the local communities, and that brings, again, the school piece into it, investing in the schools, then I think you could have a real impact there. Echoing your information, Carl, for asthma, we saw even before COVID, Black Americans are 3 times more likely to die from asthma, 5 times more likely to be treated in an emergency room, and Black women have the highest mortality rate of any ethnic or gender group. So, to the extent that you can invest upstream in these areas, in local communities, then I think you'll have more bang for your buck. You'll be able to invest, in the 10 there. So,
Dr. Marr, I hear a lot of upstream and really starting with the community first. What have you seen?
A group of us have been organizing a National Academies workshops, a series really on indoor air management for airborne pathogens and other pollutants. And we've seen some case studies of scientists partnering with local school districts. And I think those are some good examples to look to. I also want to point out some resources that I thought were particularly effective from the Seattle-King County Public Health Group, where they offered kind of indoor air quality consulting assistance for anybody who reached out to them, and also had set up a program to loan out portable air cleaners.
That's a great example. Thank you.
I'd mention a couple. One I'd mention is a really big commitment on the part of the Biden-Harris administration through our budget was for a $3.9 billion investment in public health infrastructure and workforce across the country. So that money went out to states and locals. And that allowed them flexibility to hire the kinds of staff that they needed. If they needed epidemiologists to be measuring where illness was, they could hire that. If they needed specialists in environmental health, they could hire those folks. The danger, though, is that that was COVID money, and so that COVID funding will go away unless it's built into the budget. So we really need to think about some sustainability. A second best practice was, I think related to what Ken was saying, CDC for the first time issued a really large community health worker program, $250 million, that invested in educators who often would go into the home of people in the community and do an assessment of within the home of what are the environmental risk factors here and what kind of education is necessary. Sometimes it was helping people to understand about bringing in fresh air, but it also sometimes meant putting guardrails in the windows so that the concerns that parents might have about, oh, that children could fall out, that wasn't a problem with keeping the windows open. They also were some programs that actually had a pool of money that could help landlords make some of the necessary changes in terms of the environment that might have an impact. And then maybe just the third thing I'd say, in terms of thinking across sectors, I really think we have to think multiple sectors. So it's housing and transportation, as we've said. Another sector I'd say is really important is healthcare reimbursement. CMS, as well as the private sector, are increasingly looking at paying for non-traditional services that have an impact on the environment. In Oregon, for example, they applied for what's known as an 1115 waiver that would allow doctors to prescribe having an indoor air purifier or an air conditioner or other equipment that would help a family that was already experiencing some health problems with improving the environment within their home. So I think that kind of creativity is a really smart approach that maybe helps us overcome some of the barriers to equity.
Thank you for that. That is one of the more innovative ways I've heard that a waiver be used. Carl, same question for you.
I guess the bad thing of being always last on this is all the great things are no, I'm joking. But I echo everything what everyone's saying there. I think collaboration is one of the biggest things, as what everyone's always said. I know that what we've been doing is really collaborating across sectors, public, private, stakeholders, as well as other nonprofits to really start having those conversations and educate the community as the best that we can on the kind of impacts and the cost. I would say really on the cost of inaction versus the cost of doing it now, so that because when you invest now, it helps the private sector, helps businesses, it helps workforce, it helps the educators. But if you wait, it's just going to be ongoing. Your emergency rooms, the homelessness, other kind of challenges that come with living in places that are not healthy, really burdens our systems and our services and our community. The other kind of piece is just kind of a different kind of strategy is, as a nonprofit, we lease a lot of spaces to provide our services. And what we've been transitioning to just before the pandemic is actually trying to acquire our spaces so that we can monitor and enforce the standards that we want. Because otherwise, when we're challenged with dealing with absentee owners and such, those standards aren't going to be met because you're just investing in their property, and they're not going to be investing in it themselves. And so we've really kind of tried to figure out how we can start, working with the community to purchase our spaces so that we're providing healthier spaces to work in.
Thank you for that, Carl, and I appreciate that you framed it as the cost of inaction. Certainly in our work at ODEP, we often talk about the cost of inaction as people with disabilities and other individuals who are immunocompromised or at risk of infection being locked out of the workforce, being locked out of full participation in community life and all of those ideals that are really grounded in the Americans with Disabilities Act, which passed 32 years ago today. I'd like to ask you all for, perhaps not today, maybe it was about 2 months ago, although ADA is always at the forefront of my mind. If you all could, maybe a final word, what would you leave the audience with respect to this question about ensuring that all of those communities or that are disproportionately impacted by the air quality indoors, what should they have in mind and what could we do to act now? And I don't want to put you on the spot, Carl. I'm not going to go with you last. I'm actually going to start with John, and we'll switch it up just a little bit. So, John.
I would say understanding the complexity of what it will take in order for us to make a difference, not as a barrier to proceeding, but just in recognizing this is going to be complicated, and there's an important role for multiple agencies at the federal level as well as the state and local level and multiple sectors, and we really need to be informed by the data about who's at elevated risk. You mentioned people with disabilities, absolutely, as well as people of color, as well as low-income communities, rural communities. Really look at those communities and figure out what's going to make a difference for those communities by bringing lots of people to the table.
Thank you so much. Carl?
Sure, thank you. Going back to investment, I think when I think of what is a priority for an organization, administration, a community, you have to look at how they budget. How they budget their funds for the community is their moral compass, it is their priorities. If we're not investing in these things and doing it in an equitable manner, then we're really just lip service. We're not walking the talk. And so I think really looking at how we're investing appropriately at all levels, not just government, but also as an organization, will really will show if you're really prioritizing the health of your community or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Budgets matter. Kenneth?
I want to echo now going last or close to last. But I want to connect the dots there, and I'm biased because it is asthma, and that's my focus. That's what I do for a living. But you can tackle health equity if you could reduce asthma deaths and asthma prevalence. I mean, that's just documented because it really impacts those communities. So pulling in what John said, for instance, connecting the dots and having other agencies involved. So this innovative reimbursement, where maybe you have some reimbursement for integrated pest management. So in buildings where you have cockroaches and other things, that helps the communities and that helps people with asthma. I mean, those kinds of things. This is terrific here together, but bring in other agencies, and there's a financial angle to it because it will save costs. We've all talked about that. So higher upstream interventions, investment, and then pulling in some of the other agencies would, I think, really give this some more legs and sustainability. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Lindsay?
I would call for increased awareness of indoor air quality and the importance of it for our health. We all know that smoking is bad for us, but smoking is actually the third leading cause of premature mortality worldwide. Exposure to particulate matter, both indoor and outdoor, is the second leading cause. The first leading cause is high blood pressure. So making people more aware of that and taking it as seriously as we do smoking, I think would go a long way towards improving equity, because we know that communities of color and those who are economically disadvantaged are more impacted by exposure to particulate matter and other pollutants.
Great. Thank you. So we've heard several things throughout this panel, but also consistently throughout the afternoon. I've heard the need to build awareness. Certainly in this room, we are amongst the choir, and I'm sure for those participating online, they are the choir, so to speak, and are already engaged in this issue. But for meaningful and sustainable change over time, we'll need to build awareness of the impact of clean indoor air and the cost of inaction of clean indoor air. I also heard again and again, and certainly we've heard introduced today and will continue to do so, investments matter. Budgets are moral documents, and where we provide assistance and to whom and what communities will make the difference in turning the tide for who is impacted by this. And also, I want to go back to something that you said, John, and that is meaningful stakeholder engagement. So it's not enough to engage with those communities, but to actually ensure that they are at the table. It is the case that Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately impacted by the last few years. It is the case that the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately impacted people with disabilities and people who are immunocompromised. And so they too must be at the table as we develop solutions that will last over the long term. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for the conversation today and thank all of you at home.
All right. Thank you so much. This is a great panel to follow up on. We're running ahead of schedule, which is excellent, so thank you for that. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to participate in this exciting afternoon. For those that don't know me, my name is Steph Guerra. I'm the Assistant Director for Health Security and Biodefense at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Our office works to bring together federal thought leaders to identify and drive science and technology innovations with the potential to dramatically improve our ability to respond to and prepare for future pandemic threats. We are committed to building a whole of government approach and coalitions, as well as engaging non-federal stakeholders to drive forward innovative practices and technologies on all aspects of pandemic preparedness, including interventions to reduce disease transmission indoors. And this is a priority that we first identified in our office as a transformational goal in our September 2021 document, the American Pandemic Preparedness Plan. OSTP has appreciated our efforts with the COVID response team over the past several months, as well as the interagency, and it's very exciting to be here today to meet many of you in person for the first time. We also want to, of course, acknowledge the folks that are online as well. We know many of you have been working not just over the past several months or years, but decades on the importance of this issue. As we've heard throughout the afternoon, there are tried and true methods to achieving improved indoor air quality. However, as with any pandemic preparedness capability, there's also opportunity here for research and innovation to achieve the next level of quality and scale of adoption. This includes new tools, more data, new technologies. The panels preceding this one discuss the practical applications of IAQ interventions in school settings, a business case for indoor air quality, as well as the benefits that indoor air quality can have for everyone, especially those that are most at risk. Responsible innovation in the indoor air quality tools and technology can help to enable the equitable scale-up and long-term adoption of improved indoor air quality across these different settings. It's my pleasure to introduce our Innovation in Indoor Air Quality panel, which is a group with a wide variety of expertise and sector experience to discuss what the future of clean indoor air can look like with the right focus, prioritization, and investment. So first we have Dr. Richard Corsi, who's the Dean of the College of Engineering at the University of California, Davis. Next to him, we have Dr. Shelley Miller, Professor at the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Environmental Engineering Program at the University of Colorado Boulder. Mr. Kevin Cho, CEO and co-founder of Aware, a Silicon Valley indoor air quality startup. And lastly, Mr. Scott Frank, managing partner at JB&B, which is a large mechanical and electrical engineering firm based in New York City. So to kick us off, I'd like to pose the same question to each of the panelists here. What does the future of clean indoor air look like? And how can we get there with innovation in IAQ technologies and tools? So let's start with Dr. Corsi.
Yeah, so it's not going to require rocket science to get to a place where we can significantly reduce particulate matter levels in indoor spaces and schools and homes and workplaces, particles that convey pathogens, that convey allergens, that convey toxic chemicals, diesel particles, for example, as well as gaseous pollutants, which are a little bit more difficult than particles actually, but that can be quite irritating and can also be toxic. I think if we get there, and we have the tools to do it now, but if we get to that place, we'll see reduced workplace absences, we'll see reduced absences of teachers and students in schools, we'll see a tremendous economic return on investment. One of my students has done some work in this area. Lindsay mentioned 10-to-1 benefit to cost ratio for improving indoor air quality in schools. We found the same thing for about 12 different cities in the United States. And I hope we'll get there, keeping in mind the need to employ technology for the greater good of all society, that we leave no community behind. I think everybody in this room can probably afford a really good HEPA air cleaner in their home, but a large swath of America cannot. It lives paycheck by paycheck. So we have to be thinking about accessible technologies for all.
Great, thanks. Great start. Let's move to Dr. Miller.
I want to start by what I think is critical is a shift in understanding of indoor air. Dr. Jha started by talking about water quality. I'm an environmental engineer. We regulate and maintain water quality and air quality for the public good. Therefore, I think we need to view indoor air as a public good. It provides equitable protection for all building occupants. So we need standards, guidelines, and regulatory structure to ensure adoption. And this, once we view it as a public good, then we have the tools we need. Every home needs a hood over their stove. Why don't we implement that as a really simple control measure for reducing morbidity and mortality due to particulate matter exposures from cooking every day? Why don't we implement air cleaners and understanding that you know how to size these air cleaners? People don't know what kind of air cleaner to buy or what size for their bedroom. We need to provide that information. We need to view indoor air as a public good. I'm here to talk about germicidal UV, and I'll say more later on that, but I think there are many, many applications. I don't even know why we don't see it in many, in many emergency rooms, in many homeless shelters. We have the tools. We don't have the framework for implementing them effectively right now.
Great, thank you. Mr. Cho?
Yes. First of all, that I'm greatly honored to be here, and starting from my personal journey to becoming company and startup that be here. That I have my son, as a matter of fact, that is suffer asthma. 10 years ago, that when I started aware, when he got this asthma, that there is not much of a tool that I can use. Just pediatrician basically said that it can be anything. It can be water, it can be food, or it can be air. When asthma trigger, only thing that I can do use those steroids evaporizers. So I decided to build a tool that I can actually measure data. Something is going on in the air that I like to really correlate that when it does triggers. That idea actually became a business that I started aware, that I learned that is how importance of the data. The 2 points that I like to actually discuss is one that is data democratization. We call it data democratization. It's not because of security. It's more about awareness. So data, when we're actually starting to measuring those data, it really, average person really doesn't know how to interpret those data. It's very technical. It's still very technical. So how public can understand those data, it's a lot of things has to be done by expert. For us, as a startup, we're trying to convey those, let's just build a nice tool, the device, and sensors. And sensor used to be pretty expensive before. But in this day, this digital transformation really bring us really effective price that we can actually offer those sensors. So we can build that very powerful data infrastructure that we can actually collect, which is available now, which we can offer. And that's the first one with the data. The second one is actually with the also building, for instance. So how are we going to use those data? Until today, what I learned last decade, that is, once, when I work with the last enterprise, my background is more IT and technology side of it. But what I learned that is those building management side is way behind. Very legacy system, it's hard to connect, and facility management team and IT management team, there's a considerable difference between them when we're actually doing those kind of project. So it should have to have improved a lot. So we got the data now, and we can actually collect data. We want to build some kind of intelligence on top of it. That's our next challenge that what we want to do, and the thing that I think we can deliver those within a short amount of time.
Great, thank you. Please.
The point about awareness and raising awareness, been made several times today, and as it should. And of course, what's implicit in the value of increased awareness is change in behavior. And Dr. Miller just mentioned a consumer choice preference decision difference that might come from greater awareness. But it applies to all other contexts of the built environment as well. For instance, a step that we should be taking as people like us should be walking around with one of these, a portable indoor air quality monitor. How many of those are in the room here? I see several. Okay. And we see that the CO2 concentration in this room is hovering around 1,200, 11, 13, which isn't great. It's consistent with the legacy standards of our industry, as Dr. Allen pointed out, the ASHRAE standard, but it's certainly subpar about where we need to go. So all of us asking those questions of the providers of the built environment that we consume is essential. And I say that because in my observation many years on the private sector in this industry, I've observed that the real estate industry is, as a free market, is quite efficient. And it does match supply to demand quite readily. And so if the users, people like us, are asking questions and requiring more of the built environment, the industry is able to respond. And I believe it will. So I'm optimistic about this, to the theme of if we are successful in raising awareness. The see something, do something mantra that we all live with now, post 9/11. We need the equivalent for this moment in time, which, as we have also discussed, won't last forever, about this topic of air quality.
Great, thank you all for that introduction. I think let's dive into some of the specifics here and talk a little bit about some of the innovation. So what I can gather from what we talked about so far is that there's some innovation in existing technologies that can be helpful, things that can improve affordability, ease of use, integration, energy efficiency, and also there's also some development of new tools that can really change the game, sensor integration, germicidal UV, things to make folks more aware of indoor air and also what they can do about the indoor air. So maybe I'll first turn to Dr. Miller here to talk a bit about some specific technologies that are in development or look promising for the future.
Yeah, I was pleased to hear Carl mention that there's UV in some of their buildings, and also Dr. Marr that Lindsay said King County was instrumental in some of their work. Well, they were one of the first places to call me and ask, what do I do about our homeless shelters? And when I started having the conversation about what do your homeless shelters look like, almost none of them had ventilation systems. And so I said, well, your only choice is germicidal UV. And here are the 5 companies to call because we have very limited capacity for germicidal UV. Why is that? Because right now it's seen as novel, odd for air disinfection. However, we have many, many applications for germicidal UV and water quality. Why is that? Because the EPA has said, hey, germicidal UV works great for water disinfection for this, this, and this. Therefore, every municipality can use germicidal UV to treat your water. We're not using to treat our air. We have tools, 254 nanometer wavelengths. We know how it works in buildings. I was one of the instrumental researchers to provide CDC with the data on how to write the guideline for implementing germicidal UV in healthcare facilities. That came out in 2009. Do you see germicidal UV in healthcare facilities? Not really. Why is that? This is where we need innovation. And we also have great new innovation on 222 nanometer UV. It still needs more work. It's not quite as far along as 254, but many of my colleagues are putting it in right now because we need tools, and let's do it. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those things for you on germicidal UV.
Great, thank you. I think you make the great point that there's different settings where different technologies or tools are going to be most useful or most practical or accessible. So with that, maybe I'll turn to Dr. Corsi and see if you want to speak a little bit more about increasing the affordability or ease of use of some of the technologies.
Yeah, sure. So that's something that I care deeply about, the affordability part, because again, I think we leave a lot of Americans behind if we simply say, let's improve this expensive technology so that it's better. Some of you might have heard of the Corsi Rosenthal box. I think Don Milton actually named it that. Don's here today, so thank you, Don, for putting my name on it. This was an attempt based on staying up very late one night to come up with an idea that would help a larger swath of Americans. The motivation was accessibility, low cost, and came up with this design for this box. It looks like a dorm refrigerator with walls that are MERV 13 filters and a good box fan, and threw it out on social media. And then it was built by Jim. One of them was built immediately by Jim Rosenthal. He put it out on social media, and it just sort of exploded. There's now been a lot of university types that are testing them. We've done so at UC Davis. We find that they can be 1.5 to 2.5 times more effective in terms of clean air delivery rate than $300 to $700 HEPA air cleaners at 1/3 to 1/10 of the price. So, you know, $60 or $55 is still out of the question for some, but it certainly brings a lot more people into the realm of possibility of including these in their homes. And I'm tickled to death that a lot of schools are now using them, and they're using them in such a way that they're educational projects for their students. So students are actually learning about filtration and airflow and air cleaning, and they're building units for their own classrooms. These units can provide upwards of 7 additional air changes per hour in a traditional classroom, 7 additional air changes per hour at a cost of about 1 venti caramel frappuccino per student per year. That's $4.20 per student per year. Consider the fact that it costs us $13,000 on average to educate a student in the United States per year. So we think we can get significant reductions in aerosol particles in classrooms at a cost that's minimal compared to the cost of educating students.
We discussed quite a bit today about the importance of bringing in more outside air. Sorry. We discussed today the importance of bringing additional outside air into buildings. And we need to be careful, though, because that air is precious. And in many parts of the country, at many times of the year, it's quite energy intensive. It needs to be dehumidified and cooled in the summer, especially in a place like Washington, D.C. It needs to be warmed and heated in the winter in a place in the northern parts of this country. And as we bring more air in, we have to expend that much more energy. So that would be an unfortunate coincidence if we jump out of the frying pan into the fire, so to speak, and create a further carbon emissions problem as we try to make our indoor environments more healthy. The good news is, and this I'm not sure really fits in the category of innovation, but it's an innovation in terms of standard practice. There are mature technologies that really allow you to capture that work that was done, that processing that was done on that air that was brought into the building, and have it kind of pass the baton to the new air that's about to come in, to avoid having to heat or dehumidify or cool that ventilation air. And for all of you, the term of art is heat recovery. Heat recovery. So it's going to be incredibly important as we progress and we start asking more from the design teams and the builders and the operators of buildings, that we want more ventilation, we want greater filtration, but we also want energy efficiency, and we can get that through heat recovery technologies. So it's a very important part of the conversation that needs to start.
Mr. Cho, just want to turn to you about the sensors. You kind of spoke to it a little bit earlier, that there's some innovations and different aspects of sensors for integration and data democratization. Just wanted to see if you had anything to expand on that point.
Yes, the sensor that what we've been so far experienced, that is digital sensor is so much cheaper than last 10 years, got really price reduced than electrochemical sensor, which we used to have. It does usually require the periodic calibration, like old sensors, and it does also skew data, and it's got a lifespan is much shorter. But the digital sensor now, what is available in the market, it really is semiconductor sensor. And pretty much we don't need any kind of a calibration, and much cheaper and easy to access and easy to manufacture. So the building those sensors is in general is relatively easy in terms of like a startup point of view, and price-wise also very reasonable. However, installation is hard because a lot of technology part that it has to go, right? So what we experience here is installation, meaning like for enterprise, most of them is retrofit. And when they need to connect the sensor network to their building management system, basically it's not available right now, unless you want to really put the latest system in place, completely make over the system of a building. So what we need to focus now is the connectivity, how we can lower that barrier. Also, we can connect those sensors to the system easily. That's where we are currently focusing.
Great. So now that we have sort of a landscape of some of the innovations in this space that many of you are pursuing and others here in the room and online, wanted to take a step a little higher and talk a bit about the opportunities to accelerate innovation and remove roadblocks in this field. And sort of how can we as the United States government really support and accelerate this innovation so that we have this as more of a standard practice for the next time we face a potential pandemic pathogen. So I think this time I'll start with Dr. Miller here in the middle and switch it up a bit. And then, folks, if you have additional things you want to say, just let me know.
I'm contemplating where to go. I think that as far as needs for implementing some of these solutions that we already know work, but we're just not using them effectively, we need a lot of infrastructure around training. We need installers, we need training, we need operators. So for example, if you decide that you want to install a germicidal UV system in your facility, in your space, that's really good sense because there's a lot of respiratory diseases that we face every day. Think about childcare centers when we always have kiddos coming home and bringing diseases home to their families. I think germicidal UV could be very effective against a lot of things we face every day, not just the COVID-19. We were looking at germicidal UV way back in the 2000s for our outbreak of tuberculosis. We continue to see that it's effective for measles. Don Milton and I were wanting to study it for flu outbreaks. So why can't we put a little bit more emphasis on these kinds of technologies, but we don't have the people to design it. King County, Seattle had to call me, and I said, I'm not a designer, I'm a researcher. I couldn't tell you what systems you need, but I will tell you who to call, of which, again, there's not that many experts. We need investments in the infrastructure, the training, the maintenance, the personnel, but we have to get it in places that we know are trustworthy and can do good work. We've seen problems in South Africa with bad lamps, with lamps that don't work. And so it can happen, and we know that fraud and all of these kinds of things can happen. So a good investment could really take us a long way towards investing in the technology we know exists, which is 254, and the new technology, which we're doing lots of research on, is 222.
The importance of standards has also been mentioned several times. I just want to amplify really how important that is to the market and the transformation that we need to see. Unfortunately, in the built environment, the primary method or a significant mechanism for arriving at and developing standards for products like germicidal UV and many others that show some significant promise is through the ANSI consensus-based accredited standard-making process, which is as time-consuming and laborious as it sounds. And the problem with that process, in spite of the fact that it served our economy and our country very, very well over many years, is that it is susceptible to private sector influence, namely in the ability for stakeholders to delay the process. There are ways, all within the rules, to just drag out the process. And who's motivated to do that? Some of the incumbent players in this building environment space. So it is essential that EPA, CDC, etc., need to step forward, just as other agencies have, DOE for instance, and accelerate this standard-making process so we can build confidence in the minds of the consumer, we can accelerate the market introduction of these products and really move the industry forward. But that is really, really important from my perspective.
Great, thank you. Dr. Corsi?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to underscore everything that Scott just said, and I'll try to add to it and be a little bit provocative, so buckle your seatbelts. The first thing I'd like to say is that relative to other fields, the indoor air quality fields, research for indoor air quality, research opportunities and funding has been anemic in our country historically. We are where we are right now with outdoor air quality, which is dramatic improvements, even though we still have some work to go, because of the Clean Air Act, 50-year-old Clean Air Act. And initially with that Clean Air Act, there was a lot of debate as to what the standards should be. And an initial condition was put forth. The standards for outdoor air quality today look nothing like they did 50 years ago. They've evolved tremendously, and the reason they've evolved is because a whole lot of research that has led that evolution over 50 years. 50 years, right? So I don't think we're going to solve indoor air quality problems overnight. It's taken 50 years to get to where we are with outdoor air quality. But I think we need something akin to the Clean Air Act for indoor air quality. In the year 2000, 22 years ago, I wrote an article that was a call to action and said that we needed new Clean Air Act amendments that dealt with indoor air quality. That was 22 years ago, and tried to lay out the importance of indoor air quality, all the things we're talking about today, 22 years ago. Imagine had we started 22 years ago where we would be today. We'd be almost halfway to where we've gotten with the outdoor, the Clean Air Act. So what I'd like to see is something like, doesn't have to be called this, but something like a Clean Indoor Air Act, right? And what I'd love to see around that is the support of, I'm getting very specific now, but 4 or 5 innovation hubs around the country that brings together academics, brings together people from industry, brings together stakeholders, includes not just folks from one discipline, because that gets us in trouble when we think in a disciplinary way, but brings together engineers and chemists and microbiologists, health scientists, psychologists, human behavioralists, other social scientists, economists, and so on and so forth into these innovation hubs, and use these innovation hubs to evolve something like a Clean Indoor Air Act. I think we need that, and I think that if we acted now and brought people together from different disciplines and invested significantly in moving forward and evolving a Clean Indoor Air Act 10 years from now or 22 years from now, will be a lot better than we are now had we started 22 years ago. So there's your provocative moment. Yes.
Thanks. I think you woke everybody up here in the room, so thank you so much. Did you have anything to add?
Just one thing, I think maybe the incentivize on this, setting this environment in the building maybe help. And if government incentivize, the adoption may be fast because currently adoption is relatively slow. And as also the startup, I wish more startup join into disrupt this segment and we can improve this whole technology quicker.
I just wanted to say I love where this discussion is going. Thank you, Scott and Rich and Kevin. I don't think it'll take 50 years, Rich. It might take a little bit longer because we already have health-based standards. We're talking about health indoors. We have a health-based standard for outdoor. Canada has health-based guidelines. WHO released a bunch of really great guidelines that we should look at. 5 micrograms per cubic meter for PM 2.5. That's a challenge indoors, especially with cooking. So I think we have starting places. I think we just need to be bold and courageous to step up and do the work. And I like the idea of this EPA indoor air quality focus. That's good.
Great, yeah, and we have a lot of colleagues here from EPA that work on this. Tracy, who gave the moderation of the schools panel, so appreciate their partnership. I think what I wanted to do next, I think we talked a little bit about the need for interdisciplinary expertise here, the fact that we already have some starting places, which is awesome. I think I want to talk a little bit about why this is such a unique, critical moment in time to make these investments in IAQ innovation. We spoke a bit about how this is more than just the pandemic, right? This is about public health writ large, and as well as other performance-based metrics as well. So love to hear a little bit of reflection from this panel who works really on the science, innovation, research side about why now it is important for this field.
Yeah, the easy answer to that is we have the perfect storm, and if not now, when, right? This is the time the public has suddenly tuned into indoor air quality. 3 years ago, you didn't hear as many people in the general public talking about HEPA and MERV and CO2 and so on and so forth. So it's becoming part of the American lexicon, I think, which is important. Certainly employers recognize the importance of indoor air quality from a bottom line standpoint. School districts across the country understand it from keeping kids in school and keeping teachers in the classroom and not being sick. And I think government recognizes it. So, we have everything we need. All the ingredients are in this soup to move now. The time is a perfect time.
I'll just add that obviously memories are short. Memories are short. In fact, we see it already. The Salesforces of the world 9 months ago were more vociferous and outspoken about what they want from their workplace, and you can feel it. You can feel it starting to ebb. There are other priorities creeping in, and it's just, I'm sure I can speak for all of you in saying the current status quo around this issue in the richest country in the world, it's pathetic. It's just ridiculous that we give, as consumers, as occupants, as Americans, no consideration to the air we breathe when, you sure as heck wouldn't take a drink of water handed to you by a stranger on the street, right? So if that's any further motivation for anybody, I'm happy to offer it.
I think, go ahead, Kevin.
Yes, I think during a crisis, transformational usually, right? I want to repeat it again. Data is really important because we need to have data to see what happened. So for now, I think it's a really good time for us to place the system so we can continue collecting the data. If this kind of like a pandemic, who knows, outbreak happened, then we got something we can go to see what happened and think we have a track record. So I think we have to do it now.
Yeah, I just want to agree with everything that's been said and really really think about how can we up our game even further with education and with awareness, and already it is so high from where it's been. I've been working in this field forever, and when I say I'm an indoor air quality expert, people are like, so, really. But now people, you cannot understand how much money we're going to save in terms of healthcare costs and productivity. And people will actually understand that now, that oh, that's right, if we maintain a healthy indoor environment, we're going to save money on asthma, on infectious diseases, on sick building syndrome, and on productivity. So I think that we just really need to, I just can't quite see how to get there from here, but I know there's a lot of smart people working on this problem, and I'm ready to help. So.
Right, and I think what we've seen throughout this day is that there's a lot of agreement among the different sectors here. Like a lot of the same themes that you all are sharing in this panel, we also heard echoed from some of our government stakeholders as well. And so it seems like there's a lot of energy within this topic and perhaps opportunities for public-private partnerships to really move this field forward and scale the adoption of these interventions. So what have we learned about the value of public-private partnerships in this space, and how can we leverage that to really supercharge our indoor air quality across the nation? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to give a shout out to GSA. In the built environment in this country, GSA for decades has taken risk about transformations in technologies and practices that the private sector really could not. The underfloor air system in this room, I don't know if you've noticed, the air's coming out of the floor. That was pioneered by GSA 30 years ago. And they've got the scars to prove it. There were some epic failures. We need that kind of collaboration in the private sector with our public sector partners. And I think it is a case where there will be some mistakes that we'll have to learn from, and GSA in particular, I think, is in a great position to take some of those in a calculated way on behalf of all of us and help accelerate the transformation process.
And could you describe GSA and their role for folks on the line who might not be familiar with the alphabet soup of what GSA means here in DC?
Yes, and Kevin can chime in from the bleachers here. GSA is basically the federal owner of real estate, the largest owner, I think, maybe next to DOD in the world. So tremendous amount of real estate that is occupied by primarily federal agencies. So they're the end user and customer on behalf of other government employees and government agencies. And just because of their scale and the cultural tradition, they are in a singular position to influence behavior in the marketplace. And they have done it, and they need to do it again.
Yeah, completely agreed. And just to add on that, GSA has been a wonderful partner to OSTP in our office. And to echo a point that Kevin had made earlier, they have a program called the Green Proving Ground, and they just released an RFI for that program today. One of the technologies in which they're looking at is germicidal UV intervention, so very relevant to the discussion today. Any others want to comment on public-private partnerships?
I'll just make a comment that I've been conducting indoor air quality research for my whole career, and I want to acknowledge the funding from CDC NIOSH, from EPA, from HUD, from NSF. I sneak in with an indoor air quality research project, and all of these wonderful agencies have funded the work that has gotten us to where we are now, that we know that filtration, germicidal UV, ventilation, source control, with cooking works. So then the next step is, how do we get this out into every building and every home and every family?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really emphasizes the point that Dr. Corsi made earlier, is this is such an interdisciplinary field. There's pockets of innovation and research funding across agencies. And so more coordination around a research agenda for this topic, I think, will also help to enable the wide-scale adoption of these technologies. And that's some work that OSTP is doing and has done over the past several months. I think we're getting close to time, but I want to make sure we have an opportunity for the panelists to provide sort of a last word or things that we didn't address during our time together that they think is important to communicate around the future of clean indoor air. So I'll this time start at that end with Mr. Frank, and then we'll work our way down.
Steph, thank you. I think I've covered all the points that I wanted to make, and so I thank you all for listening.
Absolutely. Mr. Cho?
I truly appreciate Biden-Harris administration recognize this IAQ area. This energized us, not only me as a whole company. You know, what we believe is true is what we have to really disrupt it. So this is great. Thank you.
And when I say we have about 10 minutes, so we do have time for additional remarks if folks have them.
Yeah, this is just a great opportunity. I really appreciate the invitation to participate in this conversation. You know, these mature technologies are readily available. We have air cleaners. But nobody knows which one to buy. So I get multiple calls about which one to buy. That's why Joe Allen and I developed this tool that says, here's how to figure out which air cleaner to buy. It's not that good to call me, just like use this tool to figure out which air cleaner to buy. We know about source exhaust. I continually shame my friends into putting a hood over their stove and running it. How many of you do that? Like, I just want to know. That's fabulous. I mean, and then germicidal UV is not for everybody, but it is for a lot more places than we're using it now. And I think we really need to look at this idea. The data science and the measurement tools in the hands of the public is so great. When you talk to a family that's all of a sudden monitoring their air quality and they realize that when they do A, this happens. You know, when I cook, my PM 2.5 goes up, but when I open the window, it goes down. This information needs to be, you know, something that all families can use. And so I'm really grateful that I'm part of this conversation and that we have a lot more to go.
Well, since we have a lot of time left, I have a lot to say. So let me lead by saying we've talked a lot today about schools. I don't think we've talked about education. And I think that's really important. I think that we need to start infusing aspects of indoor air quality into high school chemistry courses and physics courses and biology courses and high school science courses. Shelley and Lindsay, how many universities right now have a course on indoor air quality at the undergraduate level?
3.
Maybe 3 in the whole country. So we're not even teaching it at the university level. I'm teaching a first-year seminar, a freshman course at UC Davis this term on indoor air quality. And there's one engineer in the course. The other 19 students are all from animal science and economics and English and political science. And it's amazing to see their eyes open up as they learn some of the things that they hear that they've never heard before regarding the importance of indoor air quality, how to improve indoor air quality in their dorm rooms. These are all freshmen, so they all live in the dorms. It's been a great experience, but I think we need more of that, and we need more professional certification courses to educate people that have already graduated or haven't gone to college. And I think we need to keep thinking about ways to innovate. So I'm going to just throw one idea at you as we depart, and that is ceiling fans. Simple, low energy devices that bring a lot of air to them and that have characteristics we call sort of very good at mass transfer between air and the surface of the fans. I had a student about 12 years ago who made some activated carbon sleeves to put on a ceiling fan in our test house at the University of Texas at Austin. We found dramatic reductions in indoor ozone levels when we did that relative to just a ceiling fan operating with no activated carbon sleeves on it. Activated carbon cloth is extremely cheap now, cost about $6 or $7 to put a sleeve over every single fan blade. Probably need to be replaced on the order of every 3 months or so. So we're looking at $25 a year for removing a lot of ozone, as well as volatile organic compounds, as well as some semi-volatile organic compounds. You know, we have things in front of us, and we have existing technologies that we can use if we want to innovate to significantly improve indoor air quality at low energy penalty and relatively low cost. And we should be always thinking about how we can do those things. There's things that we're not doing now that we can do that would be helpful to occupants of buildings. And I too want to thank the Biden-Harris administration, the White House, Ashish, Steph, for the invitation to be here. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here in how we can achieve the future of clean indoor air, from education to infrastructure, standards, workforce development, design tools, research funding, data. We've got a lot of work to do together. So thank you all so much for your time. Please join me in thanking our panelists today.
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, I started last Monday, and this is a particular pleasure for me. I know you've been having a great day. I wanted to start by telling you that when COVID happened, I was at home in Palo Alto, where my husband and I have lived for several years now. And we went through the experience that I think a lot of people have had, which is the great relief of finally, figuring out that you could be outdoors and walking, and it was relatively safe. And then the wildfires hit, and we couldn't go outside. And I just want to convey to you all the relief that we felt when we discovered that something as simple as filtering our air in our home could actually give us a place to be safe during these multiple crises. And I think it really speaks to the work that's going on here. So my sense is that today was really about getting practical and putting to work the things that we already know about clean indoor air. And I looked at the agenda, and everything I've heard sounds like you've made an enormous amount of progress today. So I have the great pleasure of just thanking a number of people for this day. And I want to start with Ashish Jha and his team, whom we love working with. And I think putting the spotlight and getting practical about clean indoor air quality is just super important. I want to thank Alondra Nelson and our team at OSTP for elevating the voice of researchers starting several months ago as this was emerging, and really creating a platform for this important and I think very hopeful element of dealing with the COVID crisis. I think that's been incredibly helpful. I want to thank so many of the actors across government whom we've been able to work with, EPA and CDC and the Department of Energy, the General Services Administration, Department of Education, NIST, which is one of my former homes, many other places. Just for me, please, who's here from another federal agency? I'd love to know. That's so great. Excited to see you all here. And I also want to thank the industry groups who participated today, the disability advocates, the small companies, the established companies who are using these practices, and finally, the researchers, because we stand on your shoulders, and I want to really acknowledge the important work that all of the researchers have done. So with that, I will close the session, and thank you very much for your participation.